have our students' backs. And they just won another championship, so it's a world-class program, so please support it.
Thank you, Ms. Cashman. On that note, I'm sure we'll mention it at the board meeting next Tuesday, the incredible accomplishments most recently by the ROTC. And then as well, I'm thinking that, Ms. Cashman, it's time for a letter to the editor from you.
Oh, is that what you're thinking?
Yeah. Well, because I've used up mine, I think, a while ago, and I'm, so, I don't know, it'd be a great way to make the appeal. Yeah. Alrighty then. Any other any other things under board update and follow-up? Okay, so let's move on to item 7, presentations and discussion, board and staff budget priorities. Dr. Garcia.
Yeah, just was shown another letter. Yes, thanks.
Oh, great. Hold on one second. Young man, did you want to come speak at public forum? No? You sure? We can make up something. Okay, I'm just kidding with you. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Tonight, we're looking forward to having a discussion with you regarding board and staff budget priorities. Obviously, this is the first bite of the apple around budget and this discussion. I want to make very clear to members of the media that are watching that this is a work in progress. This is initial look at priorities as we looked at the strategic plan and what we heard from the board. It is not an absolute. Tonight, what you're going to be hearing is a backdrop of what came out of the spring budget workshop in terms of revenue, what the costs are, the challenges that we think our colleagues, some are facing across the state, and then what is really left to fund priorities, which is virtually nothing. So we'll go on from there. Oh, there's Mr. Knott. I was just talking to the press. I thought maybe you were watching outside, watching from the television. I was just saying that this is a work in progress, that a lot, there will be a lot of changes as we continue through the process. We're in the process of negotiations as well. So when we talk about percent, increases or what it might look like, that will evolve because of negotiations. There are 2 sections. One is possible board initiatives, and we did put possible. There's another section that says possible staff initiatives from the strategic plan. So I don't want the press, when they see things there, to think, oh, they want to go off and fund X, Y, and Z. These are just for discussion. Thank you. And Mr. Grindler.
Thank you, Superintendent Garcia, President Carrillo, members of the board, colleagues and audience. This is like all years that we've had on our journey together and working on the budget. It has its challenges, and they're unique challenges almost every year. Certainly last year we remember what took place, and this year the challenges are unique as well, and we'll do our best to guide you through those tonight. One of the big challenges that the superintendent and Richard and I and other members of the cabinet have had initially was to understand exactly what took place last Thursday at Spring Budget Workshop, and then to be able to evolve that thought process into a coherent discussion to share that with you and others and what that means to us and what our challenges are going forward. So that's what we hope to accomplish tonight. Yeah, we'll go through all of that. So the discussion topics tonight, and what you'll do, you'll find this in what you can take with you is the Finance Subcommittee and our budget notebook, which will have everything up to date at this point, and including what we provided to our school advisory councils that the superintendent provided the other day, but it's in here as well. So the first topic, which will flow through the initial part of this discussion, is updates from the Spring Budget Workshop. Then projected 18-19 SEG, and we'll work through from where we are and what that means to us. An operational budget outlook, which will show us what our challenge is, as we've done in past years, balancing options that we see so far, and open up for discussion on other ideas. And then Board of Education possible initiatives, as the superintendent mentioned, the strategic plan possible initiatives. Then it was requested that we do an FTE comparison by job class, so that is there just for reference. It'll be interesting to update that with this budget. And then a discussion at the end on all that we've talked about. So the first bullet is the unit value was announced at $4,159.23. Now, to put that in perspective, that was an increase of just under $75, or just over 1.8% over our final unit value for this year. So that resulted in a preliminary state equalization guarantee of $98.44 million. And right now, that's just a number, and what we'll work through is an understanding of what that number means to us. So we expected the unit value, almost all of us, from superintendents to chief financial officers around the state, to be much higher than this, to be able to support the mandates that were approved by the legislature. And so we had expected something like 4190 to 4200, and it was less due to the best information that we have, those 4 items. The Public Education Department added back some unexpected ancillary units, in fact, quite a large number. The governor line item vetoed the small school size adjustment legislation, which would have removed units from the actual state program unit formula and corrected some idiosyncrasies with charter schools. It also would have impacted us with a couple of our schools. At-risk units were added to the state program unit total, and it still remains a bit unclear how that worked. And we certainly made a request for more of a transparent discussion, so we don't get to this place when in future years we hope we have increases in our teacher tier minimums and additional salary pools as well. So we've got a lot of work to understand what took place more. And many districts throughout the state are pushing for that, including us.
Mr. President, so if it's all right with you, I'm going to be co-presenting with him. So do you want me to go through the chair when I speak, when he's given the presentation?
Sure. You can just say,
So I just want to clarify, I think particularly for Mr. Garcia, who's new to the board, that those bullets there are not germane just to Santa Fe Public Schools. This affected the entire state and all the charters. The other thing that I want to make sure that you understand that when you see as we go forward, that the impact to some school districts might be different depending on how their units fall, or when we get to the minimums, if they were already paying their teachers above the minimum, they may have they might have extra money, or how much they generated in different places. So this part is universal. It impacts everybody. As we move forward, it gets more nuanced in terms of Santa Fe. And did you get to that last bullet? I can't remember.
No.
Okay, do you want me to, which one did you do? Did you do at risk already?
Yes.
So in terms of the PED's estimate of future need when setting the unit value, so the Public Education Department is allowed to adjust the final unit value sometime, well, they can do it whenever, but usually before, January? Or around that time frame. But they hold back money depending on, they don't know how federal impact aid is going to come and whatnot. Sometimes that estimate is very conservative, sometimes that estimate is liberal. It really depends on the philosophy of the secretary and the CFO. Sometimes that unit value is set in collaboration with other partners. And so there is some discussion about whether or not too much was held back or not. We don't know, because we don't know the amount that was held back. And so that also could have impacted, because I think a lot of districts were feeling that if that unit value had increased to $100 versus the $74.97, it would have made a difference. And we've been also told to make sure that we do say $74.97, because those 3 cents make a difference when you start counting up lots of units statewide. Thank you.
So just another,
Yes, sir.
So right now, since the state came up with that unit value, so they could still be possibly holding money back?
They do hold money back.
Well, we don't know.
They do hold money back every year because because you don't know what's going to happen with the credits and federal impact aid. So that unit value is adjusted mid-year. We want it, sooner better than later. Usually they wait till mid-year. But you hope that they only hold back the minimum amount necessary. And there is some discussion by legislative staff whether or not how much was held back is an issue.
And then I have a question, and if it's answered later in the presentation, it's fine. You can just say later. So if this is less than I guess it was $105 that we're expecting, does this adequately, not just adequately, does it fund the raises? And it does.
No,
I see you're not. Does it fund the
answer.
raises, and does it fund the increase in healthcare?
So here's the thing. This money comes to us uncategorical, right? It just comes all in the SCG. The legislature clearly set aside money to cover the raises, and there was some last-minute things that happened because NIMSIA is separate in terms of how they signify what that increase is going to be. And at one point, it was going to be, 7.5% or over 7%, and that was reduced to 4%. And that happened during spring budget workshop. But the legislature did. But what happened was you put in those other 3 factors that people were not counting on, those additional ancillary units for whatever reason. You could say it's the legislature, it's the PED, but somewhere the communication broke down. That wasn't accounted for. The small size adjustment, they thought the governor was going to sign it, I guess. So that wasn't accounted for. And then again, the at-risk units, that coupled with where the unit value was set, was there. So in terms of the raises, I think that they did set aside that money. But when it all came out in the wash, here we are.
It shrank, as things do in the wash.
That's pretty much.
So, President Carrillo, members of the board, Superintendent, that last bullet is really what's going to be an answer throughout the presentation to your question and the superintendent's response in a little bit more detail, because that really is the controversy of what to do. So we're going to see where this puts us and what our thoughts are, knowing our commitment to our employees. So we'll see that develop as we move through the slides, building the understanding of where we are.
All right, Ms. Cashman and then Mr. Garcia.
So you will, throughout the slides, explain the controversy. I actually talked with another superintendent, and it's very concerning to me how we go forward with this, and do we have enough money to do what we're required to do now by legislature? Okay.
So moving on, I think there's a general recognition that the state equalization guarantee, the SEG, is created by this unit value times the program units for the district, which are created in all kinds of different ways. We have 12,400 students, but we have close to 24,000 program units. So they're created via different indexes on different grades, through special education, through bilingual, through at-risk units, through the training and experience factor, and several other things, that are involved here. So our projected 18-19 SEG, as we mentioned, is $98.44 million. Now, in order to understand all that, if you're interested in seeing the difference between where we are right now in our current year and what we're projecting for next year, in attachment A, we provided a side-by-side, and it's the pleasure of the board. I wouldn't go through all this tonight, but there's a lot of information here on 2 pages, which basically takes you through the state equalization formula, and then shows you side-by-side the changes. And we summarize some of those changes here on I think it's the next slide, actually. So perhaps what we could say is that if you have an interest in understanding the details of this formula, we'd be happy to share that with you. But we wanted to provide this for, for transparency's purposes tonight.
So, because I understand the unit value, and so we're multiplying that times roughly 13,000 units, and then we have an additional 24 more units? No?
Yeah. President Carrillo, Secretary Garcia, the unit value is multiplied by the total number of program units for the district that are created through all those factors, and it's approximately 24,000. What's the exact number for this next year, Richard?
23,976.
But every time we have a unit value, we get more of an increase from the state.
That's right. Every time the unit value goes up,
Right.
what that would indicate is that we would get more state equalization guarantee, but our program units might go down.
Why or what?
Well, which is what happened. So, enrollment goes down, which took place this year. The training and experience factor is actually up from the audit from this year. But special education and bilingual and small size
May I go
adjustments
back?
all changed.
Do you remember when we did that on the board, my whiteboard in the office, where I was saying the basic unit, and then a special ed, a student might be a 1.4 or 1.2. There's weights. And then we talked about training and experience. We generate that units for that. So there's various pieces in the formula that, so it's not a straight, you multiply the number of units by the unit value, because they're fractional amounts.
I guess the way I'm looking at it is, so you have this unit, you get this check from the state, and then you actually have these additional units, so you get more money on the top of this check you get.
It's just one, it's just,
So all of it-
it's the total amount, it's in 12 distributions. And then in, like when they reset the unit value, like this year, it might go up, it might go down. It's adjusted. Sometimes the unit value, you don't see a big increase.
Right. I think this slide will help. So moving right along to kind of put a little bit of more information into this discussion. So the column that you see on the left is our current situation. So the membership in this year's budget from last year's 80th and 120th day average for enrollment was 12,801, to give you an example. The audited T&E index was 1.077. Our special ed, and you can read them, special education program units, bilingual, at-risk, small school size adjustment, those are some of the key ones that we just wanted to show on this, this chart, so you could see the ups and the downs that go into these calculations, and of course every single one of them is on that attachment. And then of course our final unit value this year, 4,084.26. So that generates a state equalization guarantee of 96,878,740. So that's where we are right now, this year.
So just so you understand, so you see that at-risk index program units, it's almost $500,000. You see that across, that number?
Yeah,
Well-
these are program unit numbers.
Program unit numbers, okay? So if you look at that, 602, is it, I can't tell, is it the 124 or is it the 602?
The at-risk program in units goes up from 979 to 1124.
Oh, I have it here, never mind. But my point about that is that we generated that money, right? So did other districts across the state. If that wasn't accounted for, oh, you see what I'm saying? All of that gets pulled, they hadn't accounted for that. So did the extra money for the salaries go for that? I mean, it went for everything, right? And that's why when we say, was there enough money for the salaries? Well, yeah, I mean, the intent was there, the legislature put the pool there, but then there's a factor that has to be funded that people thought the governor was going to veto.
So really quick, so from the white column, let's just look at at-risk index programs, it was 979.6. So then it went up to 1,124, right? So because it goes up, does that mean there's more kids in that, or we get more money because of that? Well, there's
President Carrillo, Secretary Garcia, in and of itself, we would get more funding for the at-risk program units.
But because
But there's many other components to it. That's the challenge of understanding the state equalization guarantee. It's a combination of, I'm not even sure how many different weights and factors in the total index. And that's why you need to look at the entire set of changes to be able to understand the impact for the actual amount of money that comes into the district. And that's what that middle column is representing. That if the unit value had stayed the same with our changes in enrollment and T&E index and special education program units and bilingual program units, at-risk program units, small school size adjustment units, we would have actually ended up with $232,000 less than we actually have this year. So that's just it's just a benchmark. It's just a data point.
And I know you probably have already told us this, but I don't recall. Do we know what happened with those 300 students? We're down approximately 300. Do we know where they went?
I don't know if we got that analysis, Dr. Ryan.
Rudy, if you look at the membership for last year and this year, 12,801 to 12,490, that's where.
I think we did answer that question, as I recall, but go ahead. I think they were just scattered. I mean, there was no real pattern with those kids.
Secretary Garcia, each year we'll get some loss to charters, but our incoming kindergarten classes aren't as big as our exiting higher classes. So we're going to see a continual trend for the next few years until that kindergarten class starts to grow again that will ripple through our system.
So if you're paying attention, have more babies. Ms. Cashman?
So, and that's what I thought, that maybe because of the growth rate. So again, just for my other fellow board members, this means when we look at our physical layout of schools, our seats haven't gone away, our kids have gone away, so we still have a lot of excess capacity.
And President Carrillo, Vice President Cashman, it gets more so each year. So the third column is basically all the changes that we experienced this year with the new unit value that was announced at Spring Budget Workshop. So you'll see that everything remains the same from the center column with the exception of the unit value, which went up a little over 1.8%. And the actual result on that for our increase in revenue from the state equalization guarantee is that number, 1,565,093. And so that's the number that we need to be working through as we understand what we need to do with that revenue.
First me, then you. So as I understand it, if each percentage increase in salaries is roughly 800,000, we have to give 2.5. That's 1.6 million. That's 2 million, actually. That doesn't cover it.
Well, if you wait for the next slides, I think it'll be helpful, because it's not just the 2.5. You have the minimums.
The minimums of the tiers, right. Okay, got it.
Right. It does get very complicated because that $800,000, President Carrillo, you were mentioning, was for all NEA staff in the operational budget. So we'll have to understand teachers and other employees and a lot of idiosyncrasies, which we'll attempt to review tonight to make this clear.
All right, thank you.
All right, so the launching off point in a moment will be that 1,565,093. So a few more things happened at Spring Budget Workshop. I think the next slide actually is moving into the interpretations of how to do the teacher piece of this, because the teacher part is complicated because of the move in the tiers, which are listed right there, and then also the pool for an average increase of 2.5%. So that is what's created the controversy and the confusion on how to do this. And it is very challenging, and there's multiple ways you can do it. So our best explanation of the first concept is additive, meaning you apply the minimums first for each tier, then the average 2.5% increase pool, which is a little over 1.8 million. So that's the first concept. And then the second one is actually what the superintendent came up with, is inclusive, which means apply the minimums and the total cost with an average of 2.5%. So it's an interesting dynamic, and different districts are approaching it differently because there hasn't been clarity on the explanation.
But they're not going to be able to approach, they may want to approach it differently, but at the end of the day, we're going to get a directive from PED. Here is the thing, is that there is, and maybe it's been worked out, as of last Thursday, there seemed to be, even within the public ed department, some difference, because we received guidance in writing from the Director of Finance, maybe that's not the right title, but from PED, to the school business officials. Then in the superintendent's meeting, we got a slightly different directive from the secretary. So we requested that they please put the guidance out in writing. They said we would get it this week. In speaking to some legislative staff, they tend to believe that the legislative intent and what's in legislative language is interpretation number one. So here's the thing that I have said to staff and that I would advise the board is that we go with interpretation number one, because I believe that if the state goes with interpretation number two, there's going to be legal challenges by labor, and then we're going to, go through with the budget, and then if they prevail, we would be back to the drawing board having to scramble to find more money. It seems to be, that just seems to make the most sense in terms of what the way the bills were signed, and what came first was the salary schedule. She signed that, then they did the average 2.5%, where you want to get people.
Okay, so the question then is, and Maureen kind of mouthed it to me as well, and then Rudy, when are we going to know? We got a plan. They said by the end of the week, we're going to know if
by next week, by this week, we're supposed to get guidance from the public ed department. I'm hoping that it's guidance number one. If it's guidance number two, I still believe we ought to do number one, because I think two will get challenged.
All right. Maureen and then Rudy.
But if we implement guidance number one, we don't have enough money. They didn't give us that money. I mean, we're looking at a difference. We're showing 1.5 million. This is coming in at 1.8. So the salary alone took any type of, so we're already short, and we're going to be scrambling for 300,000. I mean, so.
Yes.
We do, we scramble. All right. Ready?
Just an example of a tier one educator is getting paid $36,000 and she's already maxed out. Will that person still get a 2.5%?
President Carrillo, Secretary Garcia, excellent question. Our response to that and our pre-work with NEA, based on the compensation study that the Superintendent Commission, we get started on trying to understand our salary schedules. The response would be it's an average. It's an average.
Well, and that's what's in language. So it doesn't mean necessarily every employee. And this is why I'm also saying that in a lot of districts, there's extra money because, I mean, it appears like there's more money because if they're already at the minimums, they don't have as much of a gap. Whereas if we have teachers that aren't at the minimums, you have to get them at the minimums, and then you still have to apply that percentage increase to that whole body of teachers and whoever falls in that unit, the counselors, the nurses, et cetera.
But on that point, if it's just an average, okay, so you're going from 2,000. 2,000 is what percentage of 34? You could probably do that in your head, huh, Richard? Okay, right. So they've already met that, and the people that are maybe tier one that are not going to take that leap, then there should be some sort of step for them. I imagine NEA is looking for them to have some steps.
And that's what we're doing in negotiations.
Okay.
So I think, that's something that I would ask, in terms of, well, is every employee going to get that percent? I mean, that's what we're working on
right.
with Grace in negotiations.
Maureen, I'm sorry, Rudy, were you finished?
So the district actually has a spreadsheet that talks about every single tier teacher, how much they're making and whether they're capped out, right? So that should be pretty easy to figure out.
That's correct.
How many, if we have 30 tier teacher ones, and whether 25 of them or 20 of them are going to get this average of 2.5%.
Right. President Carrillo, Secretary Garcia, we have all that information. We've done a lot of work on it. Richard has really invested a tremendous amount of time and energy, along with the team from NEA, to recraft our salary schedules, which were extremely compressed. In fact, in many of the cells are just $1 difference. And then some of the cells are just, how did this happen over time, are kind of way out of whack. And so the idea is to come up with a salary schedule that actually seems to work for recruiting intention and is logical, and it sets some strategy in it where most of our teachers are, and we want them to career path, and be able to do that within the funds that we allocate towards it and set ourselves up for additional funds in the future, which we all hope to happen, to be able to expand a solid and logical salary schedule. So it's actually not simple. It's actually very complex. That's the part that has been worked on for the last couple months and will be, as the superintendent indicated, finalized during negotiations and with the direction of the board.
That's what Dr. Singh's working on. What you explained to us the other day, you're trying to get everybody in the right tiers, correct? Thank you.
So looking at this, and I know it's an average, but we could be sitting here with some employees not getting anything? I mean, that's how I'm looking at it, and that's very problematic for us.
Right. Let me take that.
Okay, and then let me, a follow-on question, and I know it's probably not the intention of PED, but PED's going to be handing out to our exemplary teachers $5,000 to $10,000. Is that can we consider that, or is that off the table? I know, but I'm just saying.
We cannot consider that.
President Carrillo, Vice President Cashman, on your first question, we're very sensitive to that theoretically, I suppose, with an average of 2.5%. But we're definitely looking at touching every teacher in the salary table, and as the superintendent mentioned, nurses and counselors and library media specialists are also in that salary table. So all the members that are in that salary table will be, to everyone's best advantage, compensated as I think all of us would expect, with minimum amounts that make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's to be negotiated as well, finalized.
Okay. Kate and then Rudy.
Carl, did I hear you say there's a multi-year strategy for negotiations, or?
President Carrillo, Member Noble, in a sense, we're setting up this salary schedule, and we've all wanted to do this for a long time. NEA, Austin, and the district not liking our salary schedule. It's just not good for retention if next year your step is $1. It makes no sense whatsoever. So there's a recruiting and retention element of this that we have to consider long term. So the salary table is being structured such that there will be a logical, strategic, and equitable distribution as future years bring us more money for this, which we're all hoping for. So that's the longer year strategy, is that what we're doing now in distributing the funds for increases this year makes sense in this new salary table that we're working on together.
And I don't know what the timeline is for negotiations, but I think it would be great for us to see the new salary tables that when they're completed, and maybe get a little information about the thinking behind what's been changed specifically.
President Carrillo, Member Noble, that is the plan, and you might remember from our very aggressive schedule, we had 6 schools today that we went through, we've got 27 this week, is that we were working to complete our compensation part of negotiations this month so that it is in parallel with our final budget decisions. And so that would be a possibility if we're able to achieve that.
Rudy?
So a couple of questions. Since we're talking about budget, is what if the spreadsheet for the tiers is just all over the place? How do we call the individual educators in here to say, you've been placed in the wrong tier for the last 3, 5, 7 years, or that's not going to happen?
Not for the tiers. I mean, the tiers are what they are. They're based, they're the same statewide. Okay, and it's based on your licensure. So that's not so much the issue. In terms of the salary schedule, people know where they are. I think that NEA has a concern that our salary schedule is compacted. There's not a lot of movement. And so this is what we're trying to do. But there, again, we're in the process of negotiations. And so, we do have that opportunity in executive session. So, I want to honor that process and not, get too detailed about what we're working out in negotiations, but there is an executive session that Board President Carrillo asked if we could have at every regular board meeting.
So really quick, so what have you gentlemen actually explained to me the 4 or 5 different pots of money? We have an SCG, right? For lack of better terms, you get this check from the state, SCG. You get capital money, obviously, whenever that comes, and you have, those are 2 major funding sources?
We're going to talk about revenue sources a little bit later in the presentation.
All right, President Correa, going on. That note at the bottom is just a way to say what the superintendent's been talking about. The impact for district is different due to the cost of complying with the new tier minimums and then a multitude of other factors, primarily in the SEG. So our situation is the situation of many of the larger districts throughout the state. All right, so other things at Spring Budget Workshop. So there is also a pool out there which was allocated, approved by the legislature, which should have found its way into our unit value and SEG, of 2% for all other employees. So that's all other school employees that are not on the teacher's salary schedule, and then all other district employees. So that pool size will be there to distribute, and we'll see that in a minute, what that amount is. Superintendent mentioned NIPSEA was like the 1-2 punch in all of this, but we really didn't know until Friday exactly what was going to happen, because there was an emergency board meeting of NIPSEA on Thursday where a number of folks were very sensitive to what was happening on the unit value and the challenge that most districts were facing on being able to execute the legislative mandates. But NIPSEA, as the superintendent said, had approved at a board meeting a few days earlier a 7.4% increase in the health insurance premiums. And what they were working to do is to recapture all the fund balance that they felt they needed for reserves that was swept in the previous year. And that part of the issue on that fund balance, it was drawn down over the years by the requirements of funds like this and programs like this, by the Affordable Care Act and by some extremely high, a handful of employees throughout the state, which were incurring up to $10 million of liability in one case. So these things are hitting us and hitting their fund balance, and so that's what they were trying to recoup. So this 4% backs off on that, and they told us in the same breath that they announced the 4% to be prepared for a very large increase next year.
Oh, I'm sorry, me and then you. So is there any danger of that 4% going up in the next 2 weeks? Or are they setting it at 4 right now? And then what does that compute to dollar-wise that we're going to be subsidizing, because we always do, that program?
President Correa, the first question, we don't see any risk of it going up right away. And in fact, if they get in trouble during the year, what they said is they would be reducing certain benefits to keep that in place. But they were...
I'm sorry, so they're going to reduce certain benefits mid-year?
Well, they don't want to, and we don't think that'll happen.
Contractually, they can just, because they can do what they want, huh? Okay.
At their own board. So anyway, this is about the same amount that we had for an increase this year. So we'll show you those amounts here in just a moment.
Okay. Ready?
No,
Okay.
just,
Right.
so once again, every educator or everybody in the district, their insurance is going to go up 4%.
No, but we're going to take care of it. We've,
We don't have money.
well, you remember that, actually, you don't remember, of course, but for the last 7 years, or actually the last like 5 years, 4, we've been committed to absorbing that cost for employees. So they haven't had to pay for their increases. And we're committed in subsequent years as well.
Okay. And then the last bullet on the risk insurance, which is, I didn't bring the book down, is it $4 million bucks? It's a pretty significant amount of money for all different types of risk insurance. That went up under $100,000. It was about 90. But in my quick review of some of the details, I challenged some of them. So we're hoping to, well, we'll see what happens. Maybe that will be reduced. But they were going to increase that 6% statewide. So that did not happen for us, at least. All right, so this is the key chart. Those who've been on the board before remember charts like this, and this is where we actually see what the impacts are and then the going forward challenges for us to figure out what to do. So we start with the unit value, the 98.44, and then we, as you know, we have other revenue, and we have recurring revenue, other revenue sources, and non-recurring other revenue sources. And in attachment B, you'll see what those are. And that $4 million has stayed relatively the same for the last few years. But the non-recurring other revenue would be the third Connie sale, and then the sale that is working itself through for Alvord, and we don't know when it'll close, but or exactly what the net will be. But at some point in time, we would see that if that sale closed. So you can see that in attachment B, and that's something that we just need to understand. That revenue does support, and we spend every penny of it in our operational budget along with the SEG. It's a very, very important component of our total revenue. So that generates the total budget estimate for revenue of $102.44 billion. Now we can see that last year's total revenue was $100.88 million. So revenue equaling expenditures, as we do pretty much every year, that's our baseline of expenditures for moving forward into the new year. So that's where we get that $1,560,000 right there. So that's the, we saw that before, but this is our starting point for assessing then what additional expenditures we are likely to have and where that places us. We good so far?
Rudy, then Steve.
So the additional revenue that came in last year for $100 million, where did that come from? Did you say there was an additional $100 million?
President Carrillo, Secretary Garcia, that was the current year's SEG plus other revenue was $100 million.
And once again, the 2018 budget estimate is 102. Right. And then the revenue from 27-18, the revenue that you have in the small print is 100. That's a sale off of Alvord.
No. The $100.88 million that's showing there is our total revenue this year, the SEG plus other revenue, and it's also our total expenditures. So basically, yes, $1.56 million more in revenue than we had this year. So that's where we start.
And the 1.56 doesn't.
Use your mic.
The 1.56 does not include raises, or that's tucked in that 1.56?
President Carrillo, Secretary Garcia, that's revenue. So we're starting with our increase in revenue over our baseline expenditures. Okay. So now we have to address what you're asking for, which is what is out there which we see as expenditures that we need to consider, and then where that leaves us.
So all the stuff below, and then where we're going to fall short.
Right. Okay.
And then what we're going to have to cut.
Good. All right. So the first item is the teacher's salary and benefits increase from...
I'm sorry, Mr. Grunler. Kate?
That appears to be 1.82, and on the other page it was 1.88, if I'm not mistaken.
No, one is the baseline for operational expense, and the other is teacher salary benefit. They're two different line items. Is that correct?
President Carrillo, Member Noble, you're right. The 1.88 is just an approximation of what we would have expected from the legislature to follow through into our unit value. So it's a little different than the 1.82. The 1.82 right now is where we are in the salary schedule that we are proposing to start with in negotiations with NEA. So it's based on lots of assumptions which could change. And the 1.88 number is just an indication of, if you take our total program units for the district divided by the state times the pool that was authorized, that's what it adds up to. So it's no number that we have to hit. It's just an indication of what the legislative intent was, to be in this range of money that follows through into the SEG for districts.
So when I look at the additive interpretation, that's 1.88, I get that that's applying a certain amount of science, but I don't understand why we wouldn't use that as the estimated salary. I mean, actually, if we include the benefits increase, is the benefits increase the 4% of the health insurance premium?
President Carrillo, Member Noble, the benefits are what we call the mandatory benefits, which are 23.5% of any additional dollar of salary that we would pay. That's taxes, it's you know, all of the different pieces, ERB and on and on. So I guess the answer to your question is we can make those numbers equal, but the 1.88 doesn't have any magic to it either. So it's just a reference point. So based on the assumptions that are very complicated in the salary schedule that we've been working through in our work over the last couple months, this is what the number actually came out to. And it's just it's a working starting point.
So they're both guesses, but we have two different guesses, but this is more real?
No, what I'm trying to say is it's a range. And it's kind of a negotiated range. It's a general target because there's nothing specific at all in what the Public Education Department is providing us in our unit value and resulting in the SEG on exactly how much money is supposed to go into the salary pools. And that's part of what the superintendent was saying is there needs to be some direction from PED on that.
So is there, well, let me just ask it this way. What is that 1.82?
President Carrillo, Member Noble, the 1.82 is our calculations right now to do what we have been negotiating to do with our compensation team, NEA and district, to achieve as close as possible as we can some number that we're actually going to use for the salary increases plus the benefits in the teacher salary table. And I'm responding by saying that that number might change a little bit, but it likely won't change very much. But it's going to be based on negotiations, particularly on the choices that are made and the sensitivity analysis of the difference between the cells and the amounts that certain teachers will receive that are already above already paid above what's in the new salary table. It's very complicated, and we'll be glad to explain it all when we actually have that process negotiated.
On that point, if I may, maybe it might be helpful. I'm not sure if this is what you're asking, so if you're not, I'll drop the question. So are you asking, like in, we'll need to number these line items so it's easier for people to know, but on the teacher salary and benefit increase, that includes the minimum, to get people to the minimum, right, includes an average of 2.5%, plus the mandatory benefits, not health benefits.
Correct.
So like FICA, ERB, that sort of thing.
Maybe the way to think of that is not benefits, but payroll expenses.
Yeah, well, I mean, the retirement is a benefit.
Yeah, all that.
Yeah, and the same for the second category of employees, correct? There's not a tier minimum there. That's just a plain, you could really just look at the employees and look at an average of the 2%. With the line before that, it's a little more complicated than just multiplying to get to the average because different people are different spaces from the minimum.
What I'm trying to understand is the relation of that number to 2 pages back, the 1.88 million, which looks to me like it's the same. And you said...
What page are you on?
There's no page numbers. It's 2 pages back.
It's on top.
The additive... Oh, 6.
Oh,
okay.
The 1.88. Yeah,
Yeah.
It should be. I tend to agree with Ms. Noble that it would be pretty much. I mean, it's only.
If anything, what you said is it's missing what President Carrillo described as payroll expenses, which makes sense to me. I appreciate that, and so I would think it would be a little higher than the 1.88.
Yeah, I don't think that's the. I think that has to be in there, because it couldn't be that. It couldn't be just 0.6 difference. I mean, 0.06 difference.
What I heard you say, Carl, was basically it's a range. There's going to be a range there of $60,000 one way or another.
Right. It's President Carrillo, Member Noble, Superintendent. I mean, all that is true. It's we probably should have just said 1.82 because it's just a calculation as a starting point, which nobody is lining up with, and how they're moving forward and providing us our unit value. So what we're doing is, in our table, is we're going to be moving as close to what the legislative intent is as possible, which is around, for us, on our calculation of it, about 1.8 million.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to get to is there's a couple levels. There's how we deal with the salary table, which is in negotiations, and the compaction issues there. So we hope we get to a point where teachers can see a future in our salary tables more than they can now, because they've been compacted and there's not enough potential to get a raise as you're a teacher moving through the tiers and advances in this system. But what we're looking at, and I think everybody's been getting to, is if we have 1.56 million in additional revenue and we have 1.8 something million to make up in terms of the raises, I'm just trying to get to how we think about that shortfall in our budgeting.
And then it's actually even more if you consider the other employees.
Yeah, I would say let's get to the shortfall after, because I'm sure that's gonna come up in later pages, because we're going to have tough decisions to make. Ms. Cashman and Rudy?
I would just say, I think, and Board Member Noble would probably agree with me, it would be easier to have page 6 and page 8, those two numbers the same, whatever the same is, whether it's 1.82 or 1.88, but to be consistent in a checkbook, okay, so.
But they're not, we'll move on.
Yeah.
Rudy?
So really quick, Carl, the first line there says teacher salary and benefits increase. That's for the 2.5% average, and then for the new 4% benefits, right? What's a benefit increase?
No.
No, I see it down there. What's a benefit increase?
President Kerr, what I'd suggest is we go through this
Yeah.
and
Okay.
then see if there's questions, because hopefully we'll answer many of them at least.
Yeah, if it pleases the board, let's do that. And just jot down page numbers and questions as we go.
Okay. So the teacher salary and benefits increase, that includes the new tier minimums and an average of approximately 2.5% in the pool. Now, that also includes mandatory benefits, but it does not include, as Superintendent said, other insurances, health insurance. So the second one is other employee salary and benefits increases, which is an average of 2% in the salary. So that 0.42 is that amount, but again, that's also reduced by the nurses, the counselors, and the library specialists, who are up in that 1.8 number approximately, because that's
they're in
the
the
salary
bargaining
table
unit,
they're
right.
on. Then the utilities, particularly with Clean Energy Revenue Bond, the second one, SERB 2, which is Capital High primarily. I think the other piece of it is Ramirez-Thomas, which you'll see in May, those documents, particularly with that, but also how we're managing our utilities. We don't expect to see an increase next year. Then the health insurance piece, the 4%, the district portion, you'll recognize that number because it's the same as last year, about $230,000. And then the health insurance employee hold harmless portion, about $110,000. So those are very similar numbers to what we had last year. And then the risk insurance, as it stands now, is about $90,000 more. Again, I'm hoping to get us a relief on that. And then the other thing that we've committed to, we can't forget, is the 5 additional days to support the move from Milagro, and that's about $50,000. So you add all those up, that's $2.72 million, and that generates a negative number of $1,160,000 that we need to work on. So the next slide begins to talk about this.
So just for clarity's sake, 1,160,000 is our estimated shortfall. Okay.
We ready to
sorry,
move on?
Kate.
Or?
Are we trying to go through the presentation?
Oh, yes, I just wanted to make sure that everyone on that red number.
Let's talk about questions.
Can we wait, is that okay?
Well, at this point where we're at, I think now we're just talking about balancing options and then, funding requests that have to be considered together. So maybe I think it would be a good time, if it's okay, pleases the president, to go ahead and do slide 8 if board members have questions on the table.
Honestly, it's fine with me, but if Carl feels like.
No.
I don't think there's anything
Okay,
here
that's
that's going
fine.
to explain.
All right,
Thank you.
Kate and then Rick.
Okay, so I just did the difference is the 1.56 additional revenue that gets us to the, if we have 2,720,000 estimated cost increase, expenditure increase, and we have 1.56 estimated revenue increase, that 1.16 is the difference.
Correct.
Okay. And the health insurance, what is the employee hold harmless portion?
We're not making them pay for the increases.
No, I understand that, but isn't that in the 4% increase is just what we'd pay no matter what because it's increasing, and then in order to not increase the cost to our employees, we have that additional 110,000 there.
President Creel, Member Noble, that's exactly right. Okay. So there's a district portion which is larger than the employee portion.
Yeah.
But the employee portion does hit every employee in the district that signs up for health insurance, which is about 3/4 of our employees.
Okay. So that is our cost of holding the employees harmless to the increase in the premiums.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
President Creel, Secretary Garcia, the 4% is the impact on the district. Yes, the 4% creates that number for the district expense, and the 110,000 would be an employee expense shared by the 75% of our employees that are signed up in either the high or low options. And so that's the amount that they would have to pay additional, so that turns into the hold harmless concept.
So once again, the benefit increases is the 4% we're talking about. Right?
The health insurance premium.
Okay. Because it went up in the entire state.
Right.
And then the utilities, the clean energy, there should actually be, we should actually be getting money back for that, for all the money that that Lisa and her team, and it's to definitely thank the electric outlet that voted for this stuff, that, because what, last year, 2 years ago, she was estimating that we're saving $200,000-$300,000 just on utility bills, water bills, energy efficiency.
President Creel, Secretary Garcia, yeah, in total and over time. So we're basically projecting here, and Ms. Randall is very, very accurate and detailed on her projections, and they've held true the last several years, so we believe them, that all the ins and outs, you know, of changes that are taking place in the district, plus the partial year benefit that we'll get from the Clean Energy Revenue Bond, too, will lead us to no increase.
So is that, on that note, if that's okay, Rudy? So as I understood it from Lisa and you over the years, this number is likely to be flat, maybe even next year, the year following, because of the money we're saving is actually sometimes going to the increase in, because they're raising their rates. And so we have to pay increases in their rates, and we have to pay off the bond. And so the savings pays for that and ends up being a wash.
Is that true? The savings actually goes to pay off the bond?
President Creel, Secretary Garcia, yes, there's only about, to give you an example, we have in our current Clean Energy Revenue Bond, we have a reduction in our state equalization guarantee of the debt service. And we get about a 10% savings on that in our actual reduction of utility costs. So let's say the number is $175,000, because that's pretty close to what it is on our debt service for the Santa Fe High one primarily. We will probably save closer to $190, $195 in our bills to P&M for electricity. So there's a little savings built into each of those. So that's not a large contributor, but it's a little each year. And as has been mentioned, the increases in rates and the additional conservancy that we have in the district, that has been working out, to be a pretty flat projection in total: electricity, water, and gas, and sewage.
Mr. President, if we actually pay that bond off, it's $175,000, and we're generating so we have $20,000 more or less. So next year, then that bond will be paid off, so then we're going to have that additional $170,000 that we're saving from paying P&M, right?
President Creel, Secretary Garcia, it's a 25-year bond, 25-year life of the project. We really don't enter into these projects we enter into the projects with a strong revenue versus expenditure on the debt service model, but it's not something you enter in for a high ROI.
And then my last question is, what's the Milagro 50,000, what's that money going to be spent for?
Remember when we
But
talked
I know-
about with Milagro, we wanted them to have an extra, because it's a huge move. We wanted them to pay them, not just ask them, but to pay them for 5 days, all the teachers, and they'd be coming back early, and that would cover the move.
So are we paying them to pick up desk and filing cabinets and move, or
We're
just
paying them to, no, probably movers will probably do that, but it's setting up their rooms, taking down all their systems in one school, putting up all their systems in another school, and actually not asking of them to do it on their own dime, not at all, making sure they're paid well for it. Ms. Cashman?
So on the Milagro move, I mean, we definitely need to go ahead and fund that, but how many, and you may not know the question to it, how many snow days do we have built into next year's calendar?
Next year's or this?
Well, didn't we plan-
This,
Yeah.
you know, it would be next year, you know, the 2018-19 calendar. How many snow days do we have built in?
Is it 4, Ms. Sink? This year's?
I thought we were planning on no snow whatsoever.
But I think
For all of
that
Santa Fe.
but it's built
Ever
into
again.
the instructional minutes, right? And so would school wouldn't end early, though? No, because we built those minutes into the days.
Well, my thought process, and maybe it's completely wrong, but if we have 4 snow days and we do not use those snow days, can we, for just Milagro, let those kids out so we could reduce our cost? I mean, you know, it might be too confusing, but
But then they would need their, don't they still need to have their instructional hours?
I mean, well, we do, that's how they build the snow. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it's conceivable. You could, because they would have met their instructional, if we took 4 days, they would have met their instructional minutes. That's how you build it in. So that is a possibility, but
we wouldn't know that until.
no, and I think there's also other issues around childcare and other things for families and whatnot.
And what happens if it actually snows?
Well, my thought process is if we
Right.
thought this might be a possibility, that we would notify those parents right at the beginning of the year.
But it's not this year, it's next year.
No, I know that, but, so next year. So we have to wait till we get through another winter.
And if it didn't, but if it did snow, then I wouldn't have the money.
Okay, then that wouldn't, but if we notified the parents in August that there was a possibility that Milagro would be, if we do not use our snow days, we would be releasing Milagro students only early, then that gives the parents 9 months to say, okay, I know that it might happen. It may be not doable, but it might save us a little bit of money, but we wouldn't know until the end, so.
As even though my public school kid's going to be graduating, I think that'd be hellacious for families to have a portion of their kids get out early. Others have to stay in school.
They're 7th and 8th
They
graders.
need supervision, especially 7th and 8th graders. You remember, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
Rudy remembers
but-
7th
but
and 8th
But
graders.
7th and 8th graders, usually, you aren't putting them in childcare. You know, 6th graders and below, you are, but 7th and 8th graders. So I'm just saying, or maybe we,
So the only thing, I would just say, Mr. President, the only thing that, I mean, certainly the board can decide to do that. My only concern is that if it did snow, then where would we come up with the money?
Mr. Grunler?
Ready to move on? All right, so what do we do about this? So the first bullet talks about what a conservative estimate of what's going to happen in our special education budget next year for 2 major reasons. One is that we're graduating a higher than normal amount of seniors that have IEPs. And then also, there's been a concerted effort of many throughout the district, you know, particularly Deputy Superintendent Sink and our Special Education Executive Director, to reduce, well, to very carefully assess students and not over-identify.
Right.
We've heard the last decade that I've been here, almost everyone involved say that we've over-identified. So there's a very detailed process of evaluating. So that process is reducing some into the
Most of
mix.
this is actually due to, there's about 60 students that are graduating, is my understanding, that are very highly impacted kids that require a lot of extra services. You'll be seeing a lot of those graduates, I believe, coming up soon. And so I think that is really the bulk of it.
That's the biggest chunk. All right.
Okay. So that's a starting point for our consideration. However, we put a note on there because this savings option is 1 year, because those reports, those students going in for next year's 80th and 120th day averages will reduce our special education program units. So we would just have to know that that's not a recurring source of reduction in expenditure net of revenue.
So what you're saying there is that's money to not say, woohoo, we got this extra money for this. We
Well-
don't. What? We don't
Right.
look, right, but it's certainly, based on what they're saying, it's not going to be 650,000.
And then this is the big discussion, and this is the work, part of the work at least going forward, is what do we do? So we know that that first bullet is not what anybody would want to see, and going through the school budgets today, the needs are just exceptionally real, and we've all talked about that, and we've noted a lot of those in the board potential initiatives and the strategic plan potential initiatives. So that's a tough one. And then we also just know, it's a fact that, we've got the sale of properties. So this is a discussion in the mix, because we know that is non-recurring revenue. And we would never recommend non-recurring revenue to support a recurring expense, long-term at least. So we have to assess then what combination of what we can come up with that are other possibilities than this, and how these ideas might find their way into a partial solution.
Do we, and the union will kill me when I say this, but do we know the percentage of classrooms that are under-enrolled? So if we have a second, if we have any grade classroom and we say the average number is 24 kids and they're sitting there with 15 kids, if we've got a lot of those pockets, then maybe we need to be looking at what do we do, because that's a cost. The teacher gets paid whether she's teaching or he is teaching 15 kids or 24 kids, and that becomes a problem for us as a district when we're trying to make sure everybody's getting great pay raises. And
But at the same time, because we had the discussion when we were discussing Nava and EJ last time, you can't move people out of their zones, right? You've got to keep in mind that there might be a low number this year, but then that next year, maybe like the low number this year in third grade, but then the second graders will move up into thirds. You can't make these dramatic shifts. Because I know what you're getting about basically with, we have empty seats. And so then, I would hate to see our district start to look like the gerrymandering that the parties do relative to the empty seats in one school in one grade or another, because that, I think, would really hurt the continuity of a school.
I think there's another point, Ms. Sink has talked about this to me, in terms of there's some schools, right, where a combo class could make a difference. And there's pros and cons about combo classes, depending. For some kids, it's the best thing ever. If they're a little behind or a little accelerated, it could be great, and also depending on the skill of the teacher. And so, that is something that we have discussed in some of the schools for particular grades, is really looking at some combo classes. Again, that's about working with the principal. That's something that we're doing now in the collaborative budget meetings. But that could help alleviate some of this. Not a lot, but it would help some.
Rudy?
So here's the question, do we have a list that shows how many kids in each classroom? Because when the 3 district moving starts coming up.
You pull your mic forward.
Because I guess the question is, as Vice President asked, is there a list that actually shows us how many kids are in each classroom?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's what we look at when we're working with the principals to look at what they need for their budgets for next year.
Because once this whole redistricting comes up, we're gonna need to plan this out. All of that stuff needs to be taken into consideration. How many kids are out there? Whether you're moving out of the community, parents need to be involved, the whole community needs to be involved in this whole redistricting, in my opinion, but we need to have that list.
However, the combo, okay, so those are two separate issues, two very distinct issues. I mean, it does impact budget, you're right, but it's something that the board, I think, decided after last year that it was not anything that if we did go down that path, it would be long-term, give people lots of time to plan, and that's why the board commissioned that facilities master plan review study, looking at boundaries, looking at all of that, how would that be phased in, the use of the facilities, et cetera. This issue of the combo classes is something that could be addressed in the board, in the collaborative meetings that we're having with the schools around their budgets, if they had low numbers. Instead of, I mean, that could save a little bit. It's not going to give us $1.5 million.
So on this issue, I have never spoken to a teacher who likes having a combo class, not one ever. And typically, kids that tend to be like maybe more gifted or more tend to excel, the parents of those kids sometimes typically are disappointed because the teacher ends up you have to pay attention to both grades. And so if you have a section of the fourth grade portion that's not even at fourth grade, they're at maybe 2.5 grades, they require an inordinate amount of time, so then those people maybe in the upper grade are not getting the attention they need. But having said that, we have to be very careful about language. We don't redistrict. It's rezoning. Because I know that's what you mean, but it's rezoning and changing school boundaries. Redistricting is when our borders change. Ms. Cashman?
And I'm not saying I'm a fan of combo classes, because I taught a combo class, so I know how challenging it is, especially if the class is not properly set up. So you have what Board Member Carrillo is talking about, where you have the same classes are just put together instead of based on some sort of criteria that the principals are using. But I'm just looking and thinking, you know, we need to pay our folks a fair and decent salary, but how do we get there with all the demands that we have? And so I can see that some teachers may be thinking, you know, if I'm sitting there with a nice small class, that's great. But, and it could be, I know some of my former colleagues said, you know, to have 15 kids, those 15 kids were highly challenging students compared to a class the year before where I had close to 25 to 27. So, but I'm just trying to look at how do we try to come up with dollars.
So we look at the next 3 pages, that's how.
Mr. President?
Yeah.
What is the final payment of Connie?
Oh, it's $1 million. We had it spread over 3 years. It's like $1.1 million.
Okay. Right. But so we're waiting for the final payment, which is $1.1 million, or this is the third of $1.1 million?
It's the final payment. That'll make it like 3.3 or something was our final price, or 3.25, right? Yeah.
Just want to clarify something, Mr. President.
Sure.
Mr. Grenler, did you provide a backup sheet for the other revenue?
Yes, it's
What
attachment
tab?
2.
Where is it?
Attachment B. Attachment B.
You just had it there, right there.
And it includes that.
Is it well, it says recurring revenue, but is this the special revenue is this the $4 million?
Yes, ma'am, Superintendent, that is correct. The recurring revenue is $4 million, and then the non-recurring revenue that we will see is that Connie payment of approximately $1 million, and then depending on what happens with the Alvord sale. So that's at the bottom is the non-recurring revenue.
Those are our properties.
Okay, so Connie and that, but that's not, okay, that's separate from the $4 million. Okay, got it.
So hold on. So the reason I mentioned those pages, because this is where we're going to get into the guts of what we need to do. You something before that?
Yeah.
All right.
So I just want to, because we started to talk about Connie, is Connie our last payment now?
Yes.
So that number should not be $1 million, because Board Member Carrillo is correct. That number for Connie is higher in the final payment, so it's 1.1.
Yes, like 1.1, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, but that's
But the
100,000.
thing, no, I hear what you're saying, but because it's non-recurring, it's stuff that we can't necessarily allocate. So what I would encourage us to do now is look at pages 10, 11, and 12, and when we think about, and this is what we've been talking about for like the last several meetings. Okay, so, and I'm going to do this for you, Maureen. So library and media specialists, I would imagine in the future, you would want them broken down between those that are the specialists that are degreed in that and those that are library aides.
So-
But either way, hold on.
Can you clarify what the sheet is? Do you know what it is?
Looks like board initiatives and what they're going to cost.
Right.
So math initiatives that we want to do are 100,000, yeah, I can read.
Okay, fine. I'm sorry, I know you can read.
No, I
just
know, I
want-
know it is.
Okay.
So, so that's, all of our stuff totals 5.8 million, right? So then right? Yeah, then if you look like, Rudy, even at the next page, stuff that we put in the strategic plan, that's 1.25 million.
Plus the 5.8.
Yeah,
Just because I, do this reading ahead thing, and if you look at attachment C, which is very helpful for the librarians, counselors, nurses issue, and it does break down the
Oh, I see.
library and media specialists versus assistants, what the costs are. And so just what you were saying, President Carrillo, I would caution us to go all the way and say it's everything, because there's some middle ground. For example, if we wanted to put certified librarians at our 2 high schools, that would cost quite a bit less than $800,000. This is a fulsome estimate on all the librarians, the same thing with counselors and nurses. So when we look at this table, that 807 doesn't necessarily have to be 807 for us to have a couple more certified librarians.
That-
but I think the reason that number was probably used, and I know Ms. Price isn't here tonight, but there were board members that were really expressed that they wanted, if they could, a media library specialist, and
Oh,
I hear
I'm
what you're
there.
saying. Oh, yeah.
We have an exceptional librarian at Gonzales, and I truly think that she is pulling the school
Yeah.
along in some ways, and obviously that's a K-8, and they have more certified librarians than the others. I am all on board with the library thing and feel very strongly about it, but I do also think that we don't have to take an all-or-nothing approach.
Oh, absolutely. And I also want to make very clear that this was just basically what we sort of captured from Ms. Cashman's list and what people said. We're very clear that board members may have other initiatives. The same thing for the strategic plan. We just sort of cherry-picked some things that we thought these probably would be some that you might be interested in based on what you said or what were goals or what you all stressed to me were priorities. And so that's where we came up with these, but this
Okay.
is not in any way intended to be limited, or all of it is very fluid. That's why I made that comment to the media.
including but not limited to.
Including, and some of
Or
them
less.
are already
Right.
committed to, whether the hold harmless on the first line, the
Okay.
Milagro 5 days. I mean, those are not, the rest of them may be a menu of options, but a couple of them aren't.
Ms. Cashman?
And I would just caution us, the list that I gave you last week, were just my priorities, but one of the things I did say on the librarians is that maybe, we couldn't get from having a certified librarian at every place right away, but it might be a goal, so I said maybe our high schools and middle schools, and then we have a master librarian or whatever that trains the EAs. So that's a way to move, but not say it all has to happen, all or nothing at once. So
I
that's
just want
all.
to clarify, because I don't know, and I need to look at the attachment, but how did you calculate that one? Based on how many? Yeah, but I'm still curious what the assumption was.
That all the schools would have.
Is it all of them?
That's from 800.
It's from the current
Superintendent Garcia,
18.5 to the,
President Carrillo.
Just to clarify, yes.
Exactly, but it's different. So the library media specialist analysis, which is that top piece on attachment C, indicated moving everything to a library media specialist. That's the only one that does that, though. So there's different assumptions for the counselors and for the nurses to kind of move in that direction. So it's not because you wouldn't assume a full-time counselor at a school of 90 kids, for example, but you would assume additional. And I will say that the schools are all feeling this, and they're all leaning towards counseling, nursing staff, support staff. And so that's the big challenge, because we're using the same pool of money we had last year. That's why you didn't see any change on that sheet on our investment in schools. It's the same amount of money. So they're feeling that pressure for the need of additional supports as the board is identifying and the superintendent's identifying. So they're having to balance this, in the collaboratives.
So as I read this, and then Rudy, the full complement of libraries, counselors, nurses is roughly $2.7 million if we were to go like for the whole kit and caboodle, right? So then we all have to decide, to what extent do we want to nurse at every site? To what extent do we want? And I look at this at the high schools, going from 5 total to, let's see, how is the high, I was looking at the wrong thing, I'm sorry. Counselors are up here. All right. Going from 12 to 18. I mean, and I know that we wanted to make that a priority based on student wellness needs. So, then where's the money going to come from if we want to do that? And it's the same with, is Cypress spelled R-E-S-S for Houston Cypress Schools? I don't know. I'll have to
It
check.
might be spelled wrong. I think it
I don't
was CYPRESS, but
That's fine. What is ECO? Is that the development part of ECO? Is that what that is?
yes, that is, actually, and I'm still researching that. We are looking at the collaborative with the Santa Fe Community College, and it's actually for the adjunct professors. But I think there's 100,000 already currently in the budget, Carl, so I think that might be more like 100,000. It's 50,000 each for each of those FTEs. But Ms. Siegel was getting back to me on that, whether or not we had to pick that up, under dual credit. So
Okay.
so that might actually be less. Did you already go through, you already went through the, oh, that's the board, never mind. I
Well, then on
wanted
the
to-
bottom, restorative justice, on the bottom, restorative justice.
No, I didn't mean it that way.
One per school? Did we want one restorative justice
That,
FTE per school?
that might have been what we heard. That doesn't mean that that's,
All right.
again, this is fluid. So
Oh, yeah, that's fine. But equally, that's $1.8 million, so holy smokes. Yeah. And then field trips, Milagro. So are there any things, so that we can communicate to the staff, are there any things on this list as they are that are non-negotiables? So, I mean, I would say probably Milagro, right? The 5 days.
And the health premiums, that's non-negotiable.
The health premiums, right. And then it's really important that they understand our commitment to the first grade literacy kickoff.
Wait, I have a question.
Okay, first Kate and then Rudy. And we're talking about the first grade.
yeah, on the first
Got
grade
it.
literacy initiative, could that be considered non-recurring? Or is
Yes,
that- okay.
that one would be a contract.
Because
That's
this
what
is.
I'm looking at, or
So
some
that could come from
advertising
other
or
money.
coordinating, and so that could be non-recurring for sure.
And I believe you're asking that because that could then come from other money.
Right.
Right, and then
Okay.
the other, and I appreciate that, because as we go through these, I think there's some things that could be non-recurring. The field trips, I'd like to suggest, even though I think one of the board members, I can't remember whom, talked about it being in the budget, but PI is picking up a big portion of it, and I think that we could go back to them for the ones for the Native American students.
Okay.
I mean, going, not for Native American students, for
No, just
visiting
the
the Pueblos and tribes. So that one, I would say, we could try to pursue outside funding for.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that what they, generally fund.
We're not going to make
Right.
a decision tonight on all these.
No, we're not making
things.
this tonight,
No, no,
but we're
no,
trying
no.
to give
This is
staff an
crazy.
idea
This is
of
crazy.
where our priorities are, so we start narrowing
Or if
things
there's
down.
something else that wasn't captured that we didn't pick
Right,
up
I
from our
understand.
notes.
So let's talk only right now about librarian media specialists. Oh, you had something on the first grade? You had something on the first grade?
But
No, I have something on this entire list. First of all, I understand I'm probably a little bit behind the curveball, but I'm just going to say, because coming back from a conference, a national conference, the nation in its entirety is dealing with all the stuff we're dealing with. That's just
I'm
not the
sorry, I
same.
can't
Just-
hear, I couldn't hear
The
you.
nation as an entirety is dealing with this stuff as budget cuts. How do we do more with less? Where are we at? This is not just a Santa Fe public school. This is nationwide that's happening. And so everybody, all the millions of people that Steve has watching, you just have to understand that this is a big nationwide problem. Some of the things I have in question of this is, I didn't realize that there's 2 or 3 librarians at a certain school and no librarians at another school. That's kind of interesting to me.
There isn't,
Oh,
There's never no librarian, there will be a library assistant.
but we don't have 2 or
but
3
we
in
have
one
full-time librarians
site.
at some of theirs, and we have people
Well,
assisting
so
at
this
the
is,
other
so just
schools.
to explain, part of that is, and this is what we've all been struggling with, right, is site-based decision-making, the SACs, and they look at what they want and deciding, we don't want to spend money on a full-time librarian. And so some of the board, myself, we've talked about, should there be a basic program that regardless of what school you're at, that you can pretty much count. You would have counseling, you'd have librarians, you'd have nurses. And so the board, before you came on, was asking us to look at, if we were to phase this in over time, what would it cost us to eventually get to where they all had the same thing? But right now, with fair student funding and site-based budgeting, we're moving more away from that, like the purchasing of materials is more aligned now in the district. So we're getting to a more aligned, unified school district, but there are still some, and it's a decision from the SAC, Mr. Garcia, if some choose to go with a specialist versus a certified librarian.
Thank you. I understand the librarians. I had a librarian from first grade to
Carl?
to sixth grade. But the only.
Hold on a second, Carl wanted to expand on
Just
what
an
you're talking about.
amplifying comment on librarians. It's very common, and it's been the practice, whether right or wrong, I'm not commenting on that, but within the budget authority for elementary schools to have assistants, for K-8 schools and middle schools to have specialists, and we're encouraging the high schools based on board guidance to do that too, and it's going to be based on a number of things. So I'll have to report back to you when we get done.
Thank you. So in regards to a librarian, in every single school, with all due respect to the librarians, I thought we had social media and technology these days. Are we still going in there and checking out a book and doing the cards and all this stuff? Or I guess I'm just venting. We're going to
Well,
choose.
no, we need to address that. So to answer that is, certified librarian media specialists take into account all of the different ways our students are now using media. They're constantly taking certification courses and getting recertified, because obviously that's the piece. Letters on a page haven't changed, but the way kids access them has, and so they're constantly having to update their knowledge just to keep up with kids.
Sorry, Mr. President. Is that a librarian can also teach the teachers that don't know how to use this stuff, that aren't using it in their classroom?
Well, hopefully that's what our, where's Tom? That's what our digital coaches are doing.
So, we're going to choose librarians over first grade literacy, district-wide coding, math initiatives, fourth
Well,
and fifth grade science. The librarians are
might.
important than those 3 things. I understand that, but this is just mind-boggling.
Well, the thing to do, so it's not as mind-boggling, because I agree with you. But the thing to do so it's not as mind-boggling is to come out even this evening giving staff a better idea of, okay, maybe we will, because this $807,000, that's almost $1 million, then maybe we will decide, okay, a librarian assistant's fine at elementary. We do want master librarians or media specialists at K-8s and our high schools. And that'll severely cut this number.
But there's one other missing piece, Mr. President.
Of course.
So, and again, you're not voting tonight, we're just having a discussion. But let's just say that we're doing the salaries, we know what that's going to cost us, and then the board says we're going to do $2 million worth of initiatives, or, so again, as Ms. Noble said, if some of that's coming out of non-recurring, that's a little bit easier. But if a lot of it is in recurring, then that means we're going to have to go back together and identify what we're going to cut in order to balance the budget. So that's the other piece. We haven't identified cutting.
We're not at the cut part yet. Kate and then Maureen.
For what it's worth, I think we have to think about things as whether they are recurring or non-recurring expenses. And if we can identify non-recurring expenses, that's much easier to use our, not to mention responsible budgeting, to use our non-recurring revenue for non-recurring expenses. And as we look at recurring expenses, which certainly expanding librarians would be, we need to think about what our recurring revenue picture will be in the future. And I really, a couple things. I'm concerned that we're going down the path of sort of just, and it inevitably becomes this, but just looking at a menu of great things and choosing what we can't afford and what's really important. But I don't want to lose the innovative thinking that, you know, Vice President Cashman brought up her idea around how to potentially deal with the library situation with the master librarian who would be training some librarian media assistants. And, you know, there are other things. I happen to think that's a very good idea, and we haven't looked at costing anything like that. Ways that we might be a little bit innovative to improve and strengthen our library and media programming in our schools, but not necessarily just go full bore to degreed and salaried librarians in every school, because it sounds as if we all sort of feel like, okay, we can't afford all of that. But looking at these innovative solutions, I think we need to keep in our minds.
There's also
One
another...
Maureen and then Superintendent.
So I appreciate Board Member Noble bringing up reoccurring versus non-reoccurring. We should have Milagro, those 5 additional days, that should come out of non-reoccurring.
Yeah.
It's a one-time thing, so that helps us, you know, move that needle a little bit and put it under non-reoccurring. So we're starting to come up with things. The other thing I wanted to ask the superintendent, I know you had talked with me, and I don't know if it's a board initiative or I don't see it on the initiatives. I thought we were going to do maybe a group of master counselors, or is it called something different?
Is there, Madam,
Okay.
Mr. President,
Yeah.
Vice President Cashman. It's under school safety, social workers.
Okay.
And that was for a pool of master social workers, but we can talk about that when we get to this one. I wanted to go back to what Ms. Noble was saying. The other thing, you know, as we look at this creatively, for example, the district-wide coding, if we did FTEs at the schools to really take that on. But there might be other ways to do it. We could use non-recurring revenue to pay stipends, perhaps, and I know stipends are negotiated, but, you know, could we look at that? Or could we look at paying some teachers an additional X amount of days to, for example, let's say coding is really important, and you decide, you know, let's do 50,000 non-recurring or 100,000 non-recurring. Then staff could figure out how could we, you know, pay people to come a few additional days, provide some professional development around coding. So there are, you know, ways of being able to address that with non-recurring revenue.
So I just, because obviously we know non-reoccurring, and in the past, with the cash sweep and everything, we want to make our cash reserves healthier, but I guess we would want to ask the financial staff, if we did not put all of that money for the potential sale of Alvord into cash reserves, what impact would it have on us making our payroll, our bills, and so how much could we maybe withhold to use to help some of these instead of getting back up to the 5 to 7%?
Well, it would seem like we're going to put it in that bucket no matter what. I mean, right, the sale's going to go, when the money comes in, it's going to go in that bucket. the cash bucket. And then we're going to, these things that we're talking about that are non-recurring, we'll take out of the cash bucket, knowing full well that they're coming from the sales, and that we don't want to drop below, what is it like, unfortunately, it's like 4 million now, right, that we don't want to drop below?
Just to comment on that, President Carrillo, Vice President Cashman, we're not in the business to collect cash. We talk about this all the time upstairs. We're in the business to invest in our kids. So where we are right now is a minimum to run the district without much flexibility at all, and we're having to watch things, very, very carefully to ensure we're in good order, on our cash balance. So having a bit more, darting into the above the 5% that's in our board policy would be very helpful from that regard. But from a financial perspective, having more than that really doesn't buy us progress as a district. So that's our perspective from the finance department.
Just really quick on that note, Carl, what does PED require us for cash reserves? 2%? Which is
Well, that's, what does PED require?
Right. President Carrillo, Secretary Garcia, PD doesn't have a requirement. One thing that they may do is put a cap back on the cash balance like they did under former Secretary Garcia's tenure, which actually made some sense, and it was high enough that it was fine. And that would prevent a sweep, as you're concerned as Vice President Cashman. But as far as a floor, they don't have one. But as the President Carrillo mentioned, we have a cash policy, a board cash policy, to be between 5 and 7.5% of our total operational revenue, which for us, around $100 million in our total, operational revenue, puts us in, approximately 5 to 7.5 million in cash, and we're just below that now.
Yeah, so for many years we're at 6, but if we went down to 3.5 or 4, it wouldn't be the end of the world. So when the sale money comes in, if we have really important non-recurring expenses, as Kate was saying, and it's like, we're a nonprofit, right? And in some ways or even in a for-profit company, you have your budget. And if you're not spending your budget based on what your projections were to help the business and grow the business, then something's wrong. They're going to come back to you and say, why didn't you spend your budget when you said you needed this to make the business grow better? And it's really the same kind of principle on the public sector.
Just on that point, we can't go because I
We don't wanna go too
know
low.
there
Right
are
on.
people listening. We can't eliminate a cash reserves. It would not be wise fiscal policy to be sitting there with zero in reserves.
Well, it'd kill our bond rating, too.
But I know, but I'm just saying, because some people will say, well, that could be used for other things.
They
and-
always say that. So
I
people
know,
really are
so-
going to come to you and say, why can't you give raises if you have all these millions of dollars lying around? And it's like, you don't do that.
I totally understand that.
Yeah.
But we're very lucky that the tax base that Santa Fe County has and the city of Santa Fe has, that we're very fortunate that people are moving out of Santa Fe like some of the little communities or counties, but I definitely understand that. Also, so what is our cash reserve right now?
President Carrillo, Secretary Garcia, it's around 4 million. And we'll provide a projection either in the next study session or certainly in the last one, so the board would see what our projection is for the end of this year, and then what it will be with the operational plan for 18-19 that you'll be approving. So the expectations of the non-recurring revenue from the property sales and the other revenue in attachment B will be significant and will certainly help us.
And then just really quick on page 8, you actually have here 1.16 that we're actually needing to find. But that 1.16 actually already includes Milagros moving, so it should probably be removed out of page 10, correct? Because we don't need that if we're including.
Well, we don't know yet. I mean, that's what we're playing with right now. But you're right. Yeah, if we take that from non-recurring,
it's already on this page.
then it would lower that by $50,000 to 1.11. So we can slowly chip. What we want to do, honest, we slowly want to chip away at that number. That's what we want to do until it's flat. That's the goal, the challenge. So if it's okay, because I really want staff, it's the middle of April. I really want staff to be able to leave this meeting knowing what we want to do, at least on some things. Is that reasonable? Do you guys?
I have
Okay.
I have a question just on that.
Ready.
So strategic plans, possible initiatives, as well as Board of Education possible initiatives. There's some stuff here that are going to actually chop away at the Board of Education initiatives, such as school resource officers.
Because we haven't actually approved those yet.
No,
but-
and that's why I said just possible. I
Yeah.
don't, I mean, that may not
No,
even
I know,
be.
but these two sheets are actually one, right?
Yeah.
Page 10 and 11.
I mean, they go together.
Right.
Yeah.
But these were some that came, just from taking notes of what you specifically said. But you all were part also of the strategic planning. We know, again, we're looking at, like the resource officers, I don't even know, there would still have to be some collaboration with the city, because we don't have a police department. So there's, we couldn't do it on our own. We'd have to be able to collaborate with them or the county. If that was something the board decided that they were going to do, there's the safety plan, but we thought it would be ill-advised not to put it on there.
You have to put it on there as something you may.
But it may not even be even close to
So
something you
last time,
want
so
to do.
you know, it was a 50-50 split with the city last time.
And I don't know.
I don't know if they'd be willing to do that again, but obviously, if we decided we didn't want school resource officers, whoosh, that just goes off the page and that lowers that number. So really, this is a good time for us to go whoosh, to certain things that we may or may not.
Quick, can somebody go down the list really quick with me
On
and
which
everybody
one?
else? Just what's an employee health premium or harmless, okay? I understand.
I'm sorry, what did you just say?
Can somebody go down this list really quick, just so we all have
Sure.
the same definition?
Hold on.
Field trips, what are field trips? I know what a field trip,
Okay, the hold harmless was that thing where it was it was where we're taking care of the employee cost of the health increase.
okay. Good. Field
If
trips.
you look at page, hold on, if you look at page 8, it's like the third from the bottom line item where it says .11.
Okay.
Remember, there's the, okay.
So can we take that off because it's already on the previous?
Well, we don't take it off because it's part of the 1.16.
Okay, all right.
It's part of that package, so we have to pay that. We're not going to not do
Right,
that.
okay. So field trips, where are they? What is it?
Right now, the money comes from Partners in Ed, and we want additional money for the legislative trip and also the Pueblo trip.
Because we went ahead, those are board initiatives. It wasn't that the school came and said, we want to do that. We just thought, with the political climate, it's very good for our kids to know what the legislature does. And also, when we met with the tribal governors, we talked about getting our kids to understand what's happening out at the Pueblos, what's happening with our Native American students.
But we can go to PI, and Kate can, right? You're still on the board at PI, and you can say, hey, if we get an estimate as to what those things are going to cost, we can say, can you please include this in your field trip plan for the coming school year? And then if they said yes, we would take the 8,000 off our list and slowly chip.
And this is literally what they do.
Yeah,
So that's $8,000, right?
right.
And that's to take every student there?
No, which students?
It's 8th grade for government and 7th.
Seventh grade
For
for
the Pueblos.
the Pueblos.
Okay. Maybe this conference put too much stuff in my head, but I
That's
think created a good monster. I think some of the field trips that we should actually do and partner up with some of the other school districts are doing is Los Alamos National Laboratories is a good example, or the hospitals here that we have, where you could actually take 4th grader, 5th grader to the hospital and show them anywhere from HR to management to CEO to line worker.
I would say the answer is yes.
And or especially the labs. The labs we could. I could
Answer is
find-
yes. And you know what, I would bet a phrase that I won't say here, that if you wanted to do field trips to St. Christus, the social people, the medical profession and everything else and how it works, they would pick up the tab. If you wanted to take kids like the Pueblo does, Pojoaque, because they have a really robust hotel and restaurant program, they would take the kids.
This doesn't mean there aren't other field
No,
trips
and if
happening.
if we wanted to do field
I mean,
trips to
there are
Lano,
other field trips that are
Yeah,
happening,
they
Mr.
could take care of
Garcia.
it.
This was just a board policy on those two.
On those two.
To ensure that they
Yeah.
did happen.
but there should be more field trips. You're totally right. It engages kids.
So, okay, what's,
First grade literacy was the board initiative that we brought up in the retreat. It was based on Springfield, Pennsylvania, having the notion, and Linda and the super have worked on this a lot, that it's fine that the governor and all these Florida people like the idea of reading by 3rd grade, but, and this was from, actually, it's from a board conference 3 years ago, This community and school district is focusing on first grade fluency, English language, reading, and writing fluency, and they're having tremendous success. But it not only is a district initiative, it's a community initiative. So it requires laying the groundwork, and that's what that money's for.
I understand about the media specialists, the additional counselors. I understand this.
That's because we said, based on wellness and what's going on in the country, we want, and if we're going to be able to identify kids and at-risk kids really early, we're going to need people that can do that work.
So let's assume we give $100,000 and just request $898. So do we already have a plan for all the $100,000?
So look at the, I would like to talk about that if I may.
Of course, attachment C.
I just want to mention, though, that we were offering an alternative. If you look at, just because Mr. Carrillo tied that to safety. Now, there have been discussions with the board about just counselors generally, all right? But right now, there's a real pressing issue as we look at prevention and what we're hearing from our community. It's not just about gun detectors and, metal detectors rather, and hardening the schools. It's also about prevention. So what I was recommending, and this number could go down to 3 FTE, not 5, but this was for, or was this 4? How many FTE was that? That was 4 master social workers who, master social workers can do therapy, they can triage, they can connect families with services, they're very well networked. And so what I was recommending, because we don't have the money to do the phase-in for counselors, is that we had a small pool of people here that were district-based that could be dispatched out to the schools to provide that sort of support, prevention support.
Are those the school safety workers?
Those are social workers.
The 200,000 on the next page under school safety dash social workers.
The school safety is the social workers, and then the SRO, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I don't
So the
understand
answer to
your
your question is yes, and what might be helpful for the future is to have those numbered.
I agree.
Okay.
I just wanted to figure out what you were talking about, which line item.
That one, school
that
safety.
one.
So,
It's on strategic plan goals, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th one down.
And only that, and when you said it could go down from FTEs, is that a couple FTEs?
Well, that's what I was asking Carl, what this was budgeted at. That's for 3, so if, then maybe we do 2.
it could make that 898 go down, right?
Completely, for this year.
Yeah.
Thank you. I understand I guess let's just go through really quick. Math initiatives. What's that? Have everybody doing algebra in 2nd grade? Have everybody in 4th? Oh, well, I know what the coding was. Okay, no, that's right.
Do you want to,
I just want to know the assumptions in the coding. It says
Yeah.
FTE 250.
well, and then it was like, I think that was 5 FTEs is what you were thinking, but you were also thinking, Superintendent, I think you just said that that can be shared. It can be shared, it can come as a stipend, or it can come as a contract labor, or maybe it can come as contract labor from people doing coding at the community college. Yeah. That's what I understand.
Be 5 because
That's
even
not
though
enough.
our salary is 50,000, you add more benefits and everything, so it can't be 5 there.
I think that this
More like
was,
3.
I think this was a combination of coding, of FTE, and training. So I don't think it was all FTE. I think this is a typo, or it's part FTE, and part of it is actual professional development. Take them.
The next one, math initiatives. What does that entail?
Ms. Zink?
President Carrillo, members of the board, Secretary Garcia. We've been talking about math initiatives. Even Vice President Cashman has brought up ideas again on looking at different ways that we can especially work with middle school teachers. There's different programs out there right now that we're looking at to help us with math. Probably the most part of that would go to professional development at the end of the day, whatever program we choose. Because we already have a core program, you know, the textbook that they use, so we already have that. So again, if we do anything extraordinary to that, or even helping them understand standards, for instance, let alone a special initiative, it's still going to be all around professional development. So that's where a lot of that money would go.
Okay. And the next one?
Cypress model is, I'm so happy to see you here because it's been 5 years.
But we think we misspelled it. I think it is Cypress.
Like the tree instead of the island? Okay. This is a program that initiated at Cypress Fairbanks Independent School District outside of Houston. They called it a welcome program. I don't know why they called it that. I thought it was silly. But Susan also really liked this initiative. The idea is, and maybe you pilot 2 programs, one at Capitol and one at Santa Fe High, or however the Linda and the superintendent and staff decide to do it. Kids come in. We know that there are kids that come into the district, you know, at 9th grade, at 5th grade, not even fluent in their native language, let alone not knowing any English whatsoever. The example here is 9th grade, where they came in and they signed a contract. The kid and the parent signed a contract with the district that from August 15th, if that's when school started, till August 14th, the following year, it was a year program, that they'd be involved in an English-only program where they would not be using any of their native language, and all instruction would be in English. And you would use all sorts of creative ways. They used all sorts of creative ways to get people to absorb the information, to be able to make sure they stayed on the standards. And what they found is in the first cohort that went through, that a 95% graduation rate from kids that went through that program and stuck with it for that entire year. And what really compelled Susan and I to get behind this was a play. Who is here? I don't know that any, you were here, but you weren't on the board. Santa Fe High School put on this play, and it was heart-wrenching, where it was all immigrant students, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it was just this really kind of the artistic way in which they did it, how they felt about school, and alone, lost, disparaged, ignored, insulted. I mean, and they spoke about personal experiences, and it was really moving. And then what really came out of that was most of them felt like, you know something, you just want to give me a D and pass me on to get me out of your school eventually. No, we didn't do anything to show them that we cared about them and moving them up. We just passed them from one grade to the next. And so this model created a great deal of success around when the group came in at 9th grade. We did everything humanly possible to get them where they could then, they're learning English intensively, and then they could then learn all of the other subjects.
I'm uncertain, Mr. President, if this 400,000 would allow us to do 2 schools, because the model also included a whole lot of support. It has to be voluntary, first of all.
Yeah.
And secondly, but it had social work support, counseling support. I mean, there was just a lot of wraparound, a lot for those kids. And so what we were looking at was possibly 4 FTE plus any kind of tutoring or in the summer, because it was a very intensive program. It's and it's not, when we say English only, I don't want to portray it that way. It's, from what I understand, we do want to visit if this is something that the board chooses, is a intensive English instruction.
Thank you. Just on that note, I guess the whole question I have on that is, why do we have to wait till the 5th or 6th or 7th grade to start this? Why can't we start in the 3rd grade, 4th grade?
For which one?
For Cypress model
Well,
English,
first of all, we
kids in my
couldn't.
First of all,
First
they
of all,
wait
we
almost until
couldn't.
the 5th grade, and now we're going to teach English.
We couldn't. Well, I mean, there's many of our schools that don't have bilingual programming, and the kids are all in English in a class that only its instruction is in English. There's a difference between not offering bilingual education We do have to offer English as a second language by law, by federal law. But this program is a little bit different. It's not about throwing kids in and you sink and swim. This is about intensive English instruction. Now, could you do it at a different grade? Certainly you could, but the kids that have the most difficulty, the content is more difficult when you get to high school. So if you come to our country as an immigrant in 9th grade or 10th grade versus coming to our country in 1st and 2nd grade, you're going to have a much more difficult time with the content. And so, which is why we chose high school, because they'd have a greater chance for success.
And it'd be a pilot, so if it really worked, it could then be, spread out.
4th and 5th grade science?
This, again, was a board initiative where you all discussed that, and Ms. Sink, for that $50,000, again, you were looking at professional development, correct?
Secretary Garcia, members of the board, yes, that would mostly be PD, and we would, similar to what you all talked about not too long ago, is we would focus on 4th and 5th, but we're really going to do this with the new NG standards. We're really going to go after it
Can you explain
district-wide.
what NG
Yeah.
standards are?
Next gen.
The next gen science standards. And so but the focus on 4th and 5th, I think is really exciting, because that's where they're really starting to learn to use the reading that they've been working on for 3 years. Then you go in to start learning that nonfiction especially. So it's a perfect time to do it and focus maybe even first. But what I just want you to know that I think is exciting in working with the principals, that we're going to look at every schedule to make sure science is embedded in their schedules for at least 1 hour a day for 5 days a week. So we're
Love
going
that.
to study the schedules this year.
So, and for Rudy, so and it's really, it's not unfortunate, it just is what it is. At the board retreat also, we talked about the Neil deGrasse Tyson model, and because he had inspired me to no end. And then so that we all talked about that and then brought it to Linda and the super, and that's why this is here. Kate.
And there's another model, there's a guy named Dr. Kaboom, and there were a bunch of field trips to the Lensic there, I think, yesterday. And we actually went to his presentation on Sunday where he says it's just rocket science. And he does things like blowing up a balloon and letting the balloon go and says, that's rocket science. And his whole thing is that saying, oh, it's not rocket science makes rocket science too hard, because rocket science is as simple as letting a balloon go. Anyway, on the math initiatives, I think the Cypress model is different, and 4th and 5th grade science, both being heavy in professional development. Should we think about those as recurring or non-recurring? Could we do it in a non-recurring way so that we build capacity among staff that could become, I don't know, perpetual motion machine?
So like the professional development, I believe, Mr. President, members of the board, could be, Board Member Noble, could be non-recurring for sure. And I know we kind of lost it. We were kind of going through and marking recurring, non-recurring, and kind of got away from it, but you're capturing it. Okay. The other thing that we could do, for example, let's say that we hired 4 teachers that were specifically teaching, or whatever the FTE is for the Cypress model, let's say. Again, we're going to have to do some research, and I don't know that we'll be geared up, right? We're going to work on it, but let's just say that we hire people that are brand new for a specific program. We would have to say this is a 1-year contract. It's dependent on continued funding, so people are very clear that it's not a forever.
So Cypress could be non-recurring, yeah.
It could. I mean,
And then we'd find money in the big fat budget they're going to give us for 2019 to.
Win the lawsuit.
What?
Is it when we win the lawsuit?
Oh, when we win the lawsuit. We're going to be old and gray by then.
So, ECO, what's ECO, the $200,000?
so, Mr. President?
Of course.
Secretary Garcia, that actually should be 100,000, and that would be for 2 adjunct professors. We're still in discussion with ECO, but we thought, you all asked about programming. The staff has identified 2 additional pathways that they're interested in pursuing. One is in film and one is in criminal justice. However, I have concerns about that, because that's the first time I heard about it was yesterday. I do want to talk to them a little bit more, because I want to make sure that the 3 career pathways that we have in place right now at ECO, which is automotive technical and automotive body and building trades are done well. And if you're talking about 300 students, when we talk about adding 2 more pathways, it concerns me that we're spreading ourselves too thin. I'm not at all arguing that film and criminal justice aren't important, but I do think it's a discussion that we need to have. This is on here because the board asked about programming, and this was my understanding, correct, Ms. Sink? And the current 2 adjunct professors are in the budget. However, I am still in discussions with the community college about whether or not they would need this, that's what we would have to pay for those adjunct professors.
Thank you. Is there any way we could go talk to the planning department or somebody at UNM to assist us with this stuff? Can't the student actually work on this as their master thesis or so on and so forth instead of hiring somebody to do it?
To do what?
To help us write a plan for EGLE, help us write a plan.
Oh,
for
we don't need
nationals.
help with the plan. I think we're actually working with, can't remember the name of the network right now, but it's an innovative network that is looking at project-based learning around the state. We're a part of that. As a matter of fact, part of what I was at today, this conference, is related to that. I don't think that, this isn't about the plan. The adjunct professors are actually teaching. For example, these 2 would actually teach film and teach criminal justice courses, and then the students would get dual credit.
So just on that note, I follow your superintendent. When you say teach film, what does teach film mean? Does that
Excuse
actually,
me?
What does teach film? Does
Oh,
that actually
so it'd be, so in other words, the coursework that the students would take if they were at the community college to get certified in the film industry, and there's so many different career pathways within film, right? Right. But while they're in high school, they would be earning both college credit and high school credit in the film pathway. And so there's been work that Ms. Zink and her staff have been doing with the community college and ECO. It's just that I was not aware that they were going down the film path and the criminal justice path. My only reservation is the number of pathways for the school. We have been having conversations with Ms. Wagner about whether or not that would make some changes in space. I don't think it will. I think the main issues are the automotive labs and the same for the, I just lost it. What's the third one? Oh, the building trades. Building.
There's a sustainability program out there, and so me and then you, is that okay?
Wait, can I just finish up really quick?
Are you going to go to the
On
next
EGLE?
one? Sure.
I get it. Once again, the community college just passed a $20 million bond for automotive initiatives. So how are the public schools working with the community college, the last bond that they just passed, because the community college is going to go build this automotive trade type?
We'll take dual credit classes out there, so as long with taking their core classes.
So my question is then we don't have to do automotive stuff inside of EGLE.
So it depends. It depends, because it's when they offer the classes. Are they going to offer the class at a specific time for us to be able to, get the kids there, busing the kids there? There is some benefit of having our program on site, but when we were trying to expand, yes, it does make sense. And again, it also depends who's at the college. There are some times where they're, depending on the president, there's more collaboration, sometimes there's not. I think that there was an intent by the board to have this special school, because it's an alternative program. It's a place where the kids, have their own sense of identity as a school.
Did you want to do restorative justice before we move on? And no, I want to talk about ECO too. So, my sense is, somebody could come back to us next week and they could say that they want to add veterinary technician and beauty school to ECO. Then 6 weeks later, somebody comes back to us and they want to add growing cannabis and greenhouse farming and everything else to ECO. And that's the challenge with it. And I know, like, when 2 years ago when we were in Tennessee, I went to the Rutherford thing, and they did have veterinary technician and computer science, where they actually had a place where the public could bring their computers to be fixed. They had beauty school where people could come and get their hair and nails done, all at Rutherford High School. It was pretty cool. The point is, when do we say, okay, this is what we're doing, this is the footprint that it's going to need and the building that it's going to need, and this is what it's going to cost? Because my sense is that we keep, I wonder where the term came from, going down a rabbit hole. Too bad William Sapphire's not here for the etymology of phrases and things. Well, she said use it, but even before that, maybe. I'm just curious. Okay, so I mean, that's one of my biggest concerns, and I did go to this thing over the weekend. And this company, I think it was called Stantec, I brought to the information, and at some point I would love to meet with you and with Christy about it, because they were instrumental in the development of, it's the coolest thing ever. It's an aviation high school, okay? It's right across from Hobby Airport at Houston, and all their programs are around aviation. 3 pathways: flying, fixing, operating airports. And it's full, and kids love it, and they're going to have probably great careers somewhere around the country, right? So some of these kids are learning to fly before they're learning to drive. I mean, it really is cool. But this company, and then they had 2 in Kansas that they did. And what's interesting is they were, because this is where I feel like we're stuck. And I feel this way not because we are stuck, but because maybe what's happening isn't being communicated to the 4 of us. I know that you guys are working on it, I know. But this company, they do this development work with school districts so that you can kind of say, okay, really, because our vision, what is our vision, what it is we want? Because my understanding of what we voted for 2 years ago, one of the last things we did when Joel was here, it was like 2 years ago, right, is 21st century trades and technology, okay? So, and I keep bringing up high-tech machining because I never hear it mentioned. And it makes me angry because there are so many extremely well-paying jobs that could come to New Mexico and to Santa Fe around that, or welding. It's not just auto body and having a greenhouse, or auto body, greenhouse, and now film. And well, they have environmental sustainability program out there as part of ECO. But that's what I'm saying is it's all this mishmash. And so because I want you to get in touch with these guys, and I imagine that's Maureen's concern as well. I think it's called Stantec. I have it all at home. And it was really compelling.
Ms. Sink wants to say something, but
Ms. Sink.
And then I want to
All right.
piggyback on that.
And then Maureen.
President Carrillo, members of the board, Superintendent Garcia, there's about 3 or 4 important things that we take into account when we're looking at where are we going with any academy at any of our schools. Number 1 are jobs. Where are the jobs? So we look at research and stay up to research on jobs. 2, with Santa Fe Community College and dual credit and working with them, what are they providing? And then 3, we survey our kids. When you look at the numbers become a little bit stagnant at ECO, and it's got to be at a viable number where we get funding coming into ECO so that we're not having to find the funding all the time for ECO. You survey the kids, you look at the jobs, and you make sure that they have those available courses at Santa Fe Community College. What came out of all of that was criminal justice and film. Now we can say that we should make the decision, but I would like us to all think about what kids want to think about, what kids want as well. I wasn't probably knowledgeable of what maybe you wanted to see because I wasn't here then, and I should have maybe gotten some more history when I gave directive to Will of this is what we have to know before we make any decisions. We're just going to make a decision. So I probably need to go back with you and look more at history of on the trades and the different courses that you expect for them to be there historically. But again, I think we do have some of those academies. We have at least 3 of them, as we talked about, the building trades, etc. But we were trying to figure out a way to grow it enough that it's paying for itself.
Right. So on that, okay, criminal justice. So I would expand criminal justice to mean so Representative Trujillo and I were speaking over the weekend. She thought that if we could come up with a pathway, and it could be the criminal justice pathway, but that is also law enforcement, fire, and EMTs.
It is.
Okay, that she could find state money. And she said she really hopes that we could incorporate that.
So is it first responders?
Yeah, into what we're doing. And she said she could probably find state money to help support that. On the film side, I know it's like, you know, the minute there was a damn food channel, everyone wants to be a cook. But you know something? A lot of those jobs, you start chopping vegetables and it's $8 an hour, unless you're in Santa Fe and it's $11.40 an hour. Okay? And I'm serious. Even the kids that come out of Johnson and Wales, unless your daddy's buying you a restaurant, you start washing and chopping vegetables or cleaning fish. Actually, cleaning fish is very expensive if you make a mistake, right? But so you have, people have this idea of what something is. They have that same idea around film. I mean, all you have to do is talk to John Henry about this, not all that other stuff, but talk to the people that are working for IATSE. How often are they called for work? How often do these people, are they working basically full-time, year-round in the film industry? And the answer for a lot of them, it's like actors in Los Angeles, is not nearly as much as they want to. Okay? And you're furrowing your brow. No, I mean, the industry's come back, but it comes and it goes, and a lot of people don't have full-time work in it. I mean, I have somebody who's switching over to financial services industry because he can't rely on the paycheck as an electrician with IATSE. So but it's interesting. We have to think about that as well. And there was that article in the paper about great culinary jobs. There are, for the people that want to start here and move up and then want to go into hotel restaurant management at the upper echelons. But we have to be realistic about most of the jobs. Most of the jobs, if you're in Santa Fe, pay between $11.40 maybe and $16 an hour. And it's just interesting as we ask kids what they want to do. They want to be Emeril Lagasse. Is that his name? Did I get it right? I don't know. Or Chef Paul Prudhomme, but not that big. No, I mean big, physically. Maureen.
Okay, so I appreciate that you said you surveyed the kids. So let me just ask a follow-on question. Which kids?
Well, I would have to go back to Will to make sure of which kids, but I would assume it was all of the middle school and high school kids.
That's what I want to hear. I don't want to hear that you just surveyed the kids that are presently over at the early college opportunity.
We actually have 40 new kids coming in from middle schools in all of these different categories.
The next thing, you know, we already have digital media over at Capitol High School, if I'm not mistaken. So that, I mean, that could be expanded, digital media and film. The other thing is already our kids right now can get at least 6 credits in forensic science. The physics teacher, Miss Nugent, teaches that as a high school course and also over at the community college. So we've got to be careful what we're doing and that we're not duplicating things that are already there. They're just not at that particular site. So I'm concerned with that. If we're saying criminal justice, what are we doing? So I just, you know, and I'm glad you talked about what's happening because that is an item that I'm going to talk about in board discussion that came up in CRC, and I have to say, everybody's mouth dropped open at CRC. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we bring it up. Yeah, when, you know, so I'm glad you're moving ahead, and I know that we need to do this, but I think we need to be careful on what are those career pathways and that we don't duplicate efforts that are already over there, because we know, I mean, I have a lot of constituents that come to me and they're not happy that they can't get into the medical pathway program over at Capitol because it's full. I mean, and there's many, so we need to be careful of what we're doing and not just chasing tons of different things.
But on that point, if I may, though.
Well, before you on that point, I'm sorry. Because you said where are the jobs, right? The jobs are in healthcare. The jobs are in computer sciences. Those are the biggest two, aren't they? Education. In education.
The very number one job is engineering.
Okay. And so if we're doing it, so if we're looking at those three, and engineering meaning, because that's such a broad term, but I just hear what you're saying. So we've got to make sure that what we're doing at ECO is toward those things. And if it really is health sciences, then maybe we open a medical pathway as well. I don't know how, and I wouldn't presume to tell you how, at Santa Fe High.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, because Capitol High is max, I mean, space-wise. So if there is an interest in film, I mean, just because there's a program, right? Is it at Capitol for the film? You know, that there would not be a need for kids who have identified that, who are feeding to Santa Fe High. The other point is coding. We haven't talked about that, but that really is, and I know that we have that at Santa Fe High already, and hopefully we'll build that out more. But actually, I would have to look at your resources, but I believe that coding is, that whole area in computer science is actually, I think, the #1 demand for profession, and it could be engineering, but I think we know, and the interest, the kids that get so excited about that, and I'm hoping that we can build that capacity from kindergarten all the way through to high school.
And the reason I bring up, the reason I do bring up the machining thing all the time is because of people that I work with in Albuquerque who say they have nobody to hire. They just have nobody to hire that can do the high-tech machining work. And these people make $60,000 and $70,000 a year when they get to that level, you know, high-tech welders and all these things, because, you know, we're a nation that doesn't make very much anymore. I mean, make stuff. And that can be one of those economic development pieces where things come back, you know, to New Mexico. All right. Rudy?
Just one last thing on ECO is
ECO,
sorry. If you're actually going to be a engineer or welding engineer, you actually need to learn how to code your machine so that we can get your welder to program to do whatever you want it to do.
Yeah. So the ECO thing is just, it's more development money, the $100,000 that's there right now, right?
Well, that 200, what's really the 100,000 was identified for adjunct professors.
Okay. So this 1.8 million for restorative justice, one per school, that's a lot of money. What's the thinking around that? Really?
Well, that's what we
It wasn't me, but so whose baby is that?
I mean, that's what we heard, that it was
Okay.
like one per school.
That's fine.
In my mind, that was, and this is what I was hoping, is that I think we have some real overlap and repetition of potential things here. That is this restorative justice, even the school safety social workers. I was thinking that, again, if we could get to a creative approach around restorative justice, and that's something that we could even try a number of different models. You know, there's these innovative programs where middle schoolers read to shelter puppies, and reading scores go way up. And, you know, honestly, mindfulness. In Santa Fe, we have so many of these potentials. We could think about restorative justice in creative ways. We could run a couple pilots, see where we get the best results. We could try and build capacity through the social workers, the master social workers in the schools. So to some extent, whether it's additional counselors, restorative justice, one per school, the social workers on the next page, I think all of those overlap, and the point being we might want to consider a creative approach to how we do better around social work and or restorative justice and or counseling, whatever words you want to choose.
But correct me if I'm wrong, aren't they all three pretty different?
I mean, I think they are, but I'm thinking of, okay, we have a hearing officer, and pretty much the menu of discipline is, you go short-term suspension at your school, or you're going to go to bridge, or you're going to get expelled, right? And I'm sure there's some gradations in between that I'm not aware of. But if there were a larger menu that maybe was somehow managed out of wellness with the counselors or the social workers for other being more creative about what the consequences for behavior could be, is around restorative justice. There's also restorative justice programs where they actually go like to a teen court, where they have their peers who decide what that ought to be.
We still have that,
So,
right?
I mean, there's different ways, you're right, there's so many different ways of pursuing it. And I think sometimes when people are talking out loud and we just, kind of capture that's what it translated to. But, yeah, I think there is a way of, again, non-recurring revenue perhaps, to look at creating a restorative justice program. And, that could be a contract. I don't think it would take lots of money to just even design it, what that could look like.
And so the point is, it's all connected. And, if you do good restorative justice work, at least in theory, your need is reduced for the social work and the counseling work. And, to treat the whole human and the whole system sort of in a more holistic way. And just, President Carrillo, as you said, we want staff to have some idea where we're going, and have us make some decisions and some calls tonight. Some of this, I think, could use a little bit of fleshing out, and this in particular, social workers, counselors, restorative justice, I think, an approach maybe, or a couple of ideas of how to approach that might be some of what we ask if we were going to do some creative piloting of something, or what's really needed, because I don't think we can make these calls without some of the real expert knowledge on the ground and what's going on. I can talk about the importance and have seen it in very real ways, but the operational devil in the details in terms of what we might want to move forward and how those creative approaches might be most targeted to be effective, I think we need the staff advice on that.
So the challenge we have is it's the middle of April. So I would say in terms of developing a comprehensive plan that integrates restorative justice, this is my sense, restorative justice, the counseling, and the social workers can be done for fall of 2019. But now
and I'm not talking about an integrated plan. I'm talking about pilot projects to improve outcomes.
But even pilot projects, if we wanted to have them for fall of 2018, and we wanted to budget for them now, I mean, the hourglass is over. I mean, the time is almost up for us to decide on where we want to do some things. I mean, my sense is it's almost like we have to decide soon, maybe by even the end of next Tuesday, to what extent are we going to extend our guidance counselor programs, where there's really counselors that are doing wellness and not credit counting, and what's that going to cost? I mean, that's what it's like coming down to, because it's the middle of April. And if you guys say that you want to have all this staff that can work on all this 24/7, then that's fine, but I know that that's not the case. And it's...
Well, there's a couple ways to approach it, and we could even, if we wanted to allocate, pick a number, $50,000 for an RFP for pilot projects of innovative ways to do restorative justice and/or social work in the Santa Fe public schools, we might get something interesting. And so we can approach it from what is our guidance counselor staffing, and we should look at that in terms of the need, but we can also try, potentially with non-recurring revenue, some innovations in the community where if we get good results, we can look for ways to expand that in subsequent years.
I agree, and I'm just saying it's the middle of April. That's what I can't help but constantly come back to, because all those things take time and staff. I mean, even getting a $50,000 person to, come up with a plan.
Again, not a plan, a project.
A project, okay. Or a project for fall of, and that's fine. I mean, I'm happy to put 50 grand there. It's just the middle of April, and so that's where you're hearing my frustration grow.
And I understand both sides, okay? But I also know we already have some of this out there in our schools. I know of a teacher that teaches peer mediation. Now, she does that above and beyond, she integrates that. So, and so I remember seeing my daughters trained as peer mediators. And so there's things that are happening out there. So maybe we need to strengthen what's happening out there. Or, when we say stipends, maybe, that teacher is just doing it, and we say, okay, now when kids are having a problem, they're going to come to your class. And I don't know, but we just need to be careful where we're throwing $50,000, $100,000, because we don't have close to $7 million between board initiatives
Right.
and staff initiatives. So.
Well, let's go back, if it's okay with you guys, because the first 4 line items seem to be agreed upon. Can we agree that we're going to ask staff to have a library assistant at all the Ls, and then a library specialist at the middles to budget what that comes out to at the middles and highs? Would that be the wish of the board relative to librarians? Well, I don't know what it is, but they're asking you to come back with that dollar amount. But for us to give you direction, Maureen?
And I think, though, remember, at the EAs, and that's really what's happening at most of the elementary schools, is an educational assistant that is doing the library. I think we do need a master librarian, somebody that, because it's more than just checking out a book. Those inventories need to be taken, we need to order, there's a lot more.
Keep things updated.
So we need somebody to be training those librarians and, so we may need to have a district master librarian, that's their job.
A library coordinator, the same way we have an art and a music coordinator.
Yeah,
That's a great idea.
exactly.
And then maybe
Thank
somebody
you,
gets a
Accord.
stipend. Okay, so
Well,
can we?
it may be not a stipend, it may be a full-time position, because you figure out how many
Well, that's a lot of
elementary
money.
schools. I know,
Okay.
but we got a lot of
Okay, so then maybe we
libraries.
have, but I would say that the library, if you have a library coordinator the way you have the others, they would also have a post. And maybe their post is at one of the middles or one of the high schools, but they are also the library coordinator. Okay, but even backing up a little bit, are we in agreement that we want, and first off, if EAs, like EAs that are supposed to be in classrooms helping out a teacher, if they're being pulled by a principal or somebody to go be the library, that's not okay, because then the teacher is left short. Is that what you meant?
There are different types of educational assistants.
Okay, I just wanna make sure that's not-
Yeah,
okay.
so you have, so you
That's why-
have different, but they're
Then why didn't you
paid,
just use the word library assistant?
because they're really educational assistants.
Okay,
I mean,
so
they
we
fill
agree that we want an
position.
educational assistant in all the elementaries and a library specialist at the middles and highs. Because if we are, then they can work on it, they can crunch a number relative to that.
So Mr. President, are you saying that these are only 4 we're going to look at out of this list of 20?
No, we're moving down.
Okay.
But I really wanted to meet a friend of mine at 8 o'clock, but that window's quickly closing.
Oh, you are the chairman.
But if we can just like right now say, yeah, that sounds really good.
That sounds good.
Yes, Kate.
I mean, in theory, it sounds good. If you look at what we have, though, there are library specialists at 4 of the K-8s. There are 2 at the middle schools. And so I don't know where K-8s fall in what you're proposing. And I think we have to look at what exists. And I completely agree with, as I have now a few times, with Maureen's idea. And I think, we will have to do this again if we're going to create a position that is a master librarian, and we could have goals, which is recommendations as to how to evolve our library and media arts programs in all the schools, and et cetera, et cetera. But I am, I guess, unwilling to suddenly, without looking at what exists on the ground now, say that it's EAs everywhere but middle and high school.
Hold on.
And just want, I want to just clarify, when I see that we have 5 high schools, I'm talking about we need certified librarians at our 2 comprehensive high schools, not the other, not Mandela, because they're smaller schools, Mandela or Eco or the Academy. Those, we can't
Okay.
afford that.
So, because I want to move on. Okay, so certified somebody's writing this down right, certified librarians at both of the major comprehensive high schools, a librarian that you see fit at Eco, Mandela, and the Academy. Doesn't have to be like the certified $80,000 a year kind. I don't know, whatever you guys, you're the staff, you know what they need. And then library assistants at all the L's. Okay? And I hear what you're saying about what's on the ground now, but if we can say to them, K-8s are the specialists, the big guns, the library, yeah. So then they can just attach a number to it when they come back to us. We can say that's our priority, they come back to us with a number. Because we're making that a priority. You're furrowing your brow. So, I mean, to me, this makes perfect sense.
I'm looking at the numbers, and this
Okay.
is, we're increasing the budget a lot with what you just outlined.
It's not it's us outlining it. If we want to have, I hear Maureen saying certified library specialists at both high schools, right, no matter what, and then having that, I don't know if it says, is there that same grade? Is that what you're saying at the middles and the K-8s? Okay. And then just having a library assistant at all of the elementaries. Is that what we're agreeing on to send to them?
No.
Why not?
Because with all due respect to librarians, like I said earlier, my initiatives are district-wide coding, math initiatives, 4th and 5th grade science.
Okay.
I just feel that those 3 basics that you learned in school, and when I learned in school when we were first, second, third, or 4th grade is, and I understand the importance of a librarian, but that's just how I feel.
Well, they play a role in those things. I understand. Are there 3 of us that kind of, I mean, we've got to, at some point, we got to give the staff marching orders.
So let's go down the list, Mr. President, let's go down the list and take off the ones we don't want.
I think we're making it more complicated. I mean, I think we can just decide, like, if we were to just decide we want a certified librarian in every school in the district, and I know that's not, I'm just saying that, but we don't want that. But if we did, at least then they would know, oh my God, these guys are nuts.
Okay.
We have to
But
come up with
that's-
$6 million.
Wait a minute. Here's the compromise, if I may. At the high school, and at our 2 comprehensive high schools and our 2 comprehensive middle schools, there should be a certified librarian. Then we leave it up to the rest of the schools to decide what they're going to do. They know they need somebody in those libraries. So that at least starts getting us and moving us to a needle, and then maybe look into, do you have a librarian coordinator like we have a music coordinator?
And do you want to create that
program?
position? Is that part of your?
Yeah, I would guess
Okay,
that.
so there
And
you
then
have it, what she said. Was that okay with you?
At least to get a dollar figure for what that's going to cost us.
Yeah, and just to call out, they did cost out what a
I know, I
librarian
see it
in
there.
every
Yeah.
school would cost.
I know.
And what I hear Maureen saying when I look at this, it is an increase of 2.8 librarians, which is fine. I can get behind that. And I still, just so we know, that is going to be
Okay.
a recurring revenue
Right.
expense that
Okay.
we have to figure out. And
Right.
so our shortfall gets bigger.
Okay.
Right.
So did you guys get that? Library coordinator, 2 certifieds at the highs, and the comprehensive middles, and book peddlers at the
So
others? No, I'm just
I
kidding.
guess what I'm having trouble with,
Yeah.
Mr. President, is if you go back to that first page of the deficit that we have, to be able to do this, and so we're already, we haven't identified what we're going to cut just to balance. And so I'm trying to get my head around now these initiatives. The non-recurring, I totally get, because we can do those. But these that are FTEs for recurring,
Right.
it's not only the deficit, but then now to fund that.
I understand, but we have to at least come up with some numbers, and at least this gives you an idea of what we want relative to this, and I would say this isn't an initiative, it's a staffing requirement.
Well, but what I'm saying is, as long as you're all aware that we are going to be cutting staff, because 85% of our budget is staff.
Right.
And we barely got through last year. So, you know, I don't have a problem having staff do that, but I don't, are you going to identify the cuts, or do you want us to come back and tell you what we would have to cut in order to not only make up the deficit, but then to add FTE that are recurring? That's what I'm worried about.
I understand.
Well,
So I have a quick question, Mr. President. It's already here what the superintendent is saying. And so we have to deal with the deficit that we have. So these priorities that we have that we don't have any money for at this moment in time, can we actually submit our budget and then bring these back at a later date? Because these are just recommendations to PED, right?
no.
No, this is, we're building the budget for the district right now. That's what we're doing.
We're not getting extra money.
Right, we don't even have any money, so we're here hiring 2.8 library assistants, and we still got all this other stuff happening out there.
Because exactly what Dr. Garcia said. We're going to have to say, okay, if we want this, we have to sacrifice this. That's what happens in the next, I mean, as we go through the rest of April and first weekend of May, that's what we're doing.
So,
You know, and if the board doesn't think the librarians are essential, but, you know, we've had this discussion year after year, there should be some things that I think when you go to a school, you expect to see. I expect to see a principal. I expect to see a secretary. If I have a library, I expect to have a librarian. If we don't need librarians, if some people are feeling that, then we don't need to be building the capacity and having a library. We need, our kids need to learn the difference between fake news and fact. And they need to know how to research that instead of just Googling it, and the first site that pops up is atrocious. And they have no way, because where are these skills being taught? We're trying to make educated citizens.
Rudy, and then we'll move on.
I just feel whenever you go to a school, I hear your point with all due respect, Vice President, is whenever you go to school, you want to come out of that school learning something. Math initiatives, coding, English initiatives, that's my take on it.
So we're moving on. You kind of have an idea of what we want relative to libraries and stuff. We know that it costs a lot of money, and we know that we're going to have to make cuts different places. Next is counselors. I love the idea that Dr. Garcia had around having a pool. It's a way to cut down on money, but at the same time, and I would ask that maybe in the next meeting you come back to us with really what that looks like in a concrete way, so that we are supplying the, if you will, the staff that can identify risk factors early, all that stuff. You know, does that sound reasonable to you guys? And that'll probably chop a lot of money off of that. Nurses. So right now, okay, we have either LPNs or RNs, right, at the different sites. They're all RNs?
Can you remind me what a health assistance is?
Can and cannot do, and
President Carrillo, Vice President Cashman, let's start with the nurse. The nurse is an RN, and they can do all of the health plans, for example. And but the health assistants can still provide everything about that health plan. So they just can't write the health plan. So they can also do all the immunizations, keep all the records, so they help with all of that. I think the biggest area that the nurse does is the health plans.
And so is it necessary then, it looks like this number is having basically an RN, at least one RN at every school. Is that what this number is?
Well, based on what you wished, and I want to add one more thing that the nurse has to do, is because we have health curriculum that the nurses, it's the health curriculum about sex, for instance, that has to be provided by the nurse, not the health assistant. So that's another big one. So for example, at the elementaries, if we have a nurse, we try to have a nurse there at least 2 days a week and then an assistant the rest of the week. That gives them time to do those and make sure that we're following those health plans, but it also has time for them to go to the classrooms and work in the classroom.
So is it the board's wish that maybe we keep that as it is, as opposed to the idea of having an RN at every school? Because that's $1 million.
Very expensive.
So my opinion on that is actually when you go to school and you're a kid and you fall down, you go to see the nurse's office, you have a cough, you break your leg, obviously you go to the hospital, the ambulance comes and picks you up. I never realized that an RN at every school was to write a plan. So how come we can't just contract out with an RN organization to write a plan for every one of our schools? And the assistant can actually oversee the plan.
Well, what Linda was saying is the RN also has to be a person delivering some of the health, sex, different content. Also, we're not a district that contracts out. That's something that we did.
Actually, in the chart, it says we have 4.6 RNs.
There are some things that but we really are committed to having staff at Santa Fe Public Schools as opposed to, that are protected by the union, that are protected by our rules, as opposed to using contract labor.
So, just on that note, I certainly understand that, but we're at a time where we can't have a single person, a single FTE for every single position that we would love in the public schools. We can go buy a health van for a third of that cost and have the health van travel to every single school. And it's
So-
our health-
Carl,
So I guess right
Carl
now,
and then
just
Maureen.
listening to the discussion, that we should probably, we can't afford to get to additional nurses there, so let's just leave that as it is.
because it works right now, is that right?
So that item is lined out for this year, okay?
So if it works, if it was broke, don't fix it. I mean, wait a minute, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And then that's probably not even close to that $1 million, is that correct?
Right.
Carl?
President Carrillo, 2 comments quickly. The nurse number that you see here basically reflects a 50% increase in nurse and health assistant FT. That's how the number was largely generated. But what happens in our collaboratives is that we have our lead nurse for the district there, along with our wellness director, and they're both evaluating what's going on in that school and what the combination of nursing FTE to accomplish what the deputy said, and a combination of the nursing, because every school has some nursing FTE, along with health assistant FTE to provide coverage for that school.
Right.
So that's actually a pretty interesting conversation for each one of our meetings so far, and I'm sure we'll continue for the rest of them.
Yeah. So it would seem like when we come back to visit this page, if you will, next go-around, that number's going to be severely decreased. Great. Coding, and I'm not meaning to dismiss you, Rudy, but I'm moving on because we're just going to keep it as it is because it works. Is that okay? Okay.
Let's make that a
The kid gets a Band-Aid and the kid gets a shot if he needs it, and sex ed if he needs it by a professional.
On coding, let's make that a non-reoccurring cost, okay?
So we're leaving it coding, right?
Yeah, I think we should, to add to that, I totally agree, a non-recurring cost, and I actually think we can, and we don't have to do this now if we're going to look at non-recurring costs later, but we could reduce that number along the lines of what Dr. Garcia said earlier, whether it's stipends or additional days or something like that. I mean, we could go all in at 250, but that's a big jump
So creative
from
ways to
zero.
fund it.
Yeah.
Great. Leave that to staff. Math initiatives, we're good on? That's professional development? Right. No, math initiatives is recurring because the professional development is recurring.
We're going to pull it off of non-recurring.
For the first year, for this next year?
I mean, I think you should always put professional development and non-recurring, just because you don't want to tie yourselves. It's not like FTE.
All right,
where
you
you're
trust your judgment there, that's
And-
fine.
And theoretically, we could build the capacity through the professional development we
Exactly.
do to, again, perpetual motion machine. We're inventing it.
Cypress model piloting this program?
I think we should look at, Mr. President, I think we should look at it.
All right, I know that's an estimate, and they're going to contact them and see what we can do to pilot the program. Okay. Math, fifth grade science? Is that, can that be non-recurring?
Yeah, that was professional development, the same as the math initiative, and I would.
Just so long as, I mean, because I know you're banking on the non-recurring side, we're banking on the fact that we can build capacity and all these things, but we want to make sure that we don't start something and have to stop it in 2019.
Well, and that.
That's what makes me nervous, sorry, about the Cypress initiative.
And I was going to say those non-reoccurring costs, if we find out that we have to, next year, put them into reoccurring costs, we're going to have to figure that out. But
You're right. And then, and to answer your concern, that, you know, that's a good point. And, I mean, maybe some foundation money can come forward to help us on the Cypress model, but that could also be non-recurring, because if the first year just is if it looks like it's going to be a bust for us for whatever reason, at least we didn't build it into a long-term budget.
Is recurring and non-recurring
We're taking a lot of money non-recurring tonight, aren't we?
initiative, they're recurring and non-recurring initiatives like the fourth and fifth grade science, that's $50,000. How is that going to be reoccurring? They're basically going to do a plan for us, right, for $50,000? So we're going to hire somebody that's going to go, no?
No, this is professional development, training for teachers.
Okay.
Eco we did. Restorative justice, yeah, and that number can come down a lot. So on the recruit, recognize, retain, Is that just the additional expenses relative to that, going to different places and?
This is a combination of things that Elias and Jeff want to talk about that as they're partnering on this initiative. So it's a combination of staff and programming and a number of things. So they'll talk briefly about it.
So you, in the interest of, because I know you've both done presentations in the past on this, so consider when you talk to us now that we retained all that information.
President Carrillo, members of the board, I'm going to let Elias talk about the FTE first, and then we'll talk about the second line item there.
Good evening, President Carrillo, members of the board. The FTE is around the Project Thrive concept, so that we can support the strategic plan or the department transformation plan and try to make every effort possible. There are some needs in terms of, because we do have some processes that are manual, and so we need to infuse technology or new processes in place. So to increase those services, we do need some FTE to align ourselves and provide more services to our staff and leadership within the organization. And so we calculated
One's a secretary, because does it have a secretary, an admin assistant? I mean, that's crazy. I mean, we're spending a lot of time doing it, administrative work.
Right.
That's insane. Because one of the big issues that the board identified is customer service. And I do see some major improvements in the plan already. Having a full-time assistant director, which he had not had staffed, has made a huge difference. So we've seen some major changes already. In order to implement the plan, we identified a data person, I believe, that
Correct.
we need to assist in the department. And then the other, I think you broke it up into two areas. One was, do you remember? You have one now.
Correct. So we would redesign our HR department. One is to, or the thought process is to have recruiting and what we call employee services under one group, benefits and specialist into another group, and have new leadership into that group to help all the activities. Another individual within the FTE would be a compliance person to help us making sure that we spend a lot of time in STARS reporting. I don't want to get into the level of detail, but we spend a lot of time just reconciliation between us and the state of New Mexico when it comes to licensure and highly qualified staff in the positions that they play.
They're becoming more and more time-intensive with the requirements from PED.
Right. Maureen?
Is this, though, I mean, just like the city is putting in this new computer system, is this a one-time thing, or is this constant for us? Because if we're bringing up databases, once those databases get up and everything is right, then I know there's some maintenance of it, but the effort is not the same as when you're taking everything that's sort of, tons of different files to bring them up. So what is this? Is it just a one-time thing?
To address your question, the data person that we want to hire, it would be probably about a year, 2 years max, because we would have systems alignment. Right now we have about what I would call 3-4 core systems in our HR. All of those do not communicate with one another. So for us to obtain information, we have to go into all 4 databases and then extract that. So the data person would allow us to align and reconcile all of the systems, just a manual process until we have a system of alignment. So that would be one. The compliance is to help us get into good systems that the system would actually do those activities for us. Correct.
I guess we know that human resources has been a problem for us. If we went ahead and funded this, I would like it to be non-reoccurring, and I would like to make sure that whoever we hire knows it's just a short period of time. You have no guarantee of future employment. It's a
Like a 2-year contract.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be a contract person, it could be somebody that works for
Well,
us.
all of our
but-
employees are at will.
Yeah,
And we're
but I
an
want to
at-will
make
state.
sure that they understand.
But I do believe, though, that not all 3 FTE are one-time investments. I think that he's only talking about one of those FTEs would be non-recurring. I think the capacity in the department, even if you do get those systems aligned, you're still going to need an administrative assistant. And we still look at this new restructure of the department needing that additional FTE. So I would say 2.5 probably would be recurring, to be honest with you, in terms of what the staffing need is.
It goes back to economic supply and demand. Right now, what I would consider our department is very transactional. So we have a lot of demand, especially right now with retirement, budget going on. We're getting calls about, well, so if my budget is decreased at a school site, where am I able to go to? What are my options? Transfers are open. We're getting a lot of calls. What is the transfer process? And so forth. So the demand is
And
high.
investigations.
Yeah, we do. We have about 37 active investigations, so, and they are time consuming.
Okay, so I've got to do something. I'm terribly sorry. I'm going to call a recess for 5 minutes. When I say 5 minutes, right now it is, because I have to call Leo back, it is 7:58. So when your phones say 8:03, we're all back in our seats. This isn't like a break where we all kibitz and go get a snack. All right? I'm sorry, and quick recess, 5 minutes. Thanks, everybody. It's 8:03. Thank you for indulging me. I appreciate it very much. So, Elias, you were telling us about that plan, and Dr. Garcia, you were telling us how only one of those positions might be a temporary one, but most of this is just for ongoing needs. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So the number can stay at 160.
And we need this, so
Yes,
go
we need
ahead,
this.
and we can decide whether
And
it's
then your hand was up
reoccurring,
when I
non-reoccurring.
interrupted you with my thing. Yes, Kate.
How many people work in HR?
Currently, we have 13 FTEs.
And this would be adding 2 long-term, 2 recurring, and 1, my other question was, would, and I appreciate what Vice President Cashman said earlier, I think, it's fairly standard. It's as if it's like a grant-funded position, right? If it's only going to last 2 years while you do a special project or something. Would that be something that ETN funding could be applied to?
We asked about that, actually, and I believe the answer was no. Right, Dr. Ryan? I mean, I don't know if you want an explanation, but the answer I got was no. Yes. The other piece, though, that and I looked into this in terms of HR standards and what we have in schools, is just because we're so highly regulated, and in terms of all the certification, it is a bit more intense than, say, maybe where there isn't this level of licensure and specialization.
Thank you, Elias. Mr. Jeffrey.
President Carrillo and members of the board. So the second line item, there's the budget needed to implement a strategic plan to recruit, recognize, retain staff. The recruitment, the marketing that would go into something like that, the outreach that would go into something like that, to meaningfully recognize our staff. The
onboarding, stuff like that.
All of that stuff, retaining, everything that would take, if given, that budget, the things that we would need to do.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, is there anything you think that's superfluous that's, I mean, I think we all agreed in that portion of the strategic plan, the necessity to bring people in and keep them.
Mr. President, just for lack of time, I think it's fine to bring that forward, but can you just give us a breakdown of exactly what you're going to do? Are you going to go travel to New York? Are you going to travel to Florida? Or are you going to...
He's going to Barbados.
Or no, it's just no. What are we doing? Just a little bit more detailed breakdown.
President Carrillo, board member Garcia, that's a good question. So we're going to be nailing that out depending on what our budget is, and so a marketing plan would definitely be needed. You could even see what other schools just in Santa Fe that aren't Santa Fe public schools are doing in the way of marketing and the amount of money they're putting into that to market their schools, to attract the best of the best educators into their schools. So that would be a big part of it. Definitely working with the colleges, the universities that have the teacher prep programs to create that pipeline of talent into our district, directly out of college and out of the teacher prep programs would definitely, and then the recognition as a former teacher. I know for 16 years in the classroom, we would get a certain amount of recognition, but to do it meaningfully, in a way that I really think would make our educators really feel appreciated. I mean, it's gonna cost some money, and so specifically what that looks like, that's one of our summer projects.
So the thing that might be helpful to do as we go down this page is if you have your copies of the strategic plan, because then you can see, I mean, all they did was put a number to what they had in their plan. Right? Okay.
So,
family community engagement.
And that could be, at least that 250 could be non-recurring, and of course, as Mr. Gephardt said, we would have to work with the budget we have, right, and then prioritize that. But that could be non-recurring revenue on
some of it.
Some of it.
Right.
Well, like for example, if we develop great videos and marketing materials, do you have to reinvent that every year? Probably not. So, but then, you'd have to update. So, but I do think it could come from non-recurring if you really wanted to infuse and kickstart that and see what happens with the budget the following year.
And I will say again, a letter to, I know kids that are sitting there out in these colleges right now, a personal letter to them saying, we would love to have you come to Santa Fe Public Schools and teach. Please call us. They're all shopping around for jobs. They're not getting those letters. Let's be on the forefront. And I know kids that are here now that are in college. They left state because they wanted to get out of New Mexico. And now they're sitting there thinking, oh, well, maybe I'd like to come home. Get a letter out to them before they get scooped up someplace else.
Someplace where they're paying them $11,000 more a year?
Yeah,
But yeah,
because they
I actually have
family ties here.
signed some of those letters
Yeah.
that they've taken out.
Good, so
Yeah.
let's get those, and, they're sitting there, we know we don't have enough educators now, and that field is drying up.
So maybe half of that is recurring and half of that's non-recurring. And the reason I say that is if you're onboarding, you're going to onboard every year a certain number of people. And when you're letting people go, you're going to do it, you're going to have those things that happen all the time. Not everyone's going to stay for all the time, forever. Right? Okay. Family community engagement. Is that an increase to what we're doing right now, 30,000?
Board Member Carrillo and members of the board, I'm not sure, I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure why that figure's there, the family and community
Is it
engagement.
legislative districts to the bull ring? Legislative dinners to the bull ring? Or?
I really don't know where that figure came from. I apologize for that. I should be more prepared.
Okay, then it's gone.
Either cross it out, but let's, in fairness, put a question mark beside it, okay? You can get back to the board.
That's fine. Attributes of a graduate, it's further developing the plan and then rolling it out?
Yes.
Okay. The PAX 5. Yeah.
Did you want to do the social workers?
I'm sorry. I don't know why, I'm sorry.
And so that is that pool. And so in lieu of counselors, of adding the counselors right now around safety, it would be the social workers. That 200,000 you said represented 3 FTE, Dr. Grandler, Mr. Grandler?
Yes, 3.
So that's 3.
So if you're combining the two here and those other counselors where the line item was like almost $1 million, where is the happy medium? Where you've got the pool people you need that are master social workers, and then you've got the people that we've already got at our school sites.
These people are more for triaging, if there's a kid who's behaving a particular way or cutting or any number of things that are coming up at our schools or, kids that are found with drugs or whatnot. Our counselors are overwhelmed that we have right now. Particularly at the high school, many of our counselors are not even available to do counseling. So these are to really triage and to really provide intensive intervention when a kid is identified. They've done a threat assessment, all of that.
So are we saying a thumbs up to that, and then we're examining on the board initiative page having the balance? Because this attachment C were for 898,000, that was having account every place and more. So we'll only have,
Keep our counselors that we have.
So keep-
and add the social work.
Yes.
is that okay with the 4 of you? Keep what we have for now and add this concept in the social workers?
That's fine, just keep in mind, like the superintendent said, that.
Kate wants
the
to
council-
speak. I can see her formulating the thought.
Just
Go
keep in
no?
mind that, as the superintendent said, the existing counselors are already way overburdened, so.
So this would take some of the heat off them on the wellness side?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that means that that money, like at the previous page, seriously goes down.
Yes, although we left the money on the previous page, we didn't do the increase, right? We left it as is.
Right, so that 800
898 goes away. That's
Yeah.
not coming back because.
Well, a portion of it stays because we do have counselors currently at
But
schools.
these were additional.
But that was
Okay.
that was the new money, the 898.
Additional, got it, yeah.
So we're talking about 3 new positions for the social worker pools. This
For a
is-
pool for the district, yes.
Yep.
That they would service all 30 schools.
Triage.
Triage, you know, specific incidences.
And I guess my question is that the approach you'd recommend, given that we have the Sky Center, we have communities and schools, the value for money is getting district employees?
The need is there. I mean, Sky Center is terrific. I mean, all of the Adelante, all of these supports, but we have such high need. And I think also from what we heard around prevention, around safety, I think that this would be better and more useful to us than counselors, just because of their added expertise.
And the prevention and safety, I think that's really important to think about it that way and talk about it that way. And just so we're clear, that means this is recurring revenue, as long as, for those of us keeping track.
Oh, yeah. And the PAX 5?
Linda, would you please?
President Carrillo, members of the board, this is you might remember in our strategic plan that we really are working on, again, the social behavior and positive behavior in the classroom and learning how to behave and how to have choices in what you do and say and how you do that, how you treat other people. That's what that PAX program is. And so we're trying to do a few schools at a time. We've got about 5 schools now, and the strategic plan is kind of like that 5 schools per year. I think we did it this year. We found $20,000 for one of the schools. I think we can keep trying to find that money. In other words, we get people to contribute and donate and whatnot, but it's expensive. It's $20,000 per school.
And then PAX 5 is being different from social emotional learning.
Because it's really teaching students in the classroom how to have choices on how you work with the world and behave and act and
Isn't it a consistent behavior management plan or program?
It's a little bit more than that.
But I mean, that's the basics of it, right?
It's the basis, but it's bigger than that. It's really helping kids, even with trauma, learning how to make choices. So, and we have a lot of our kids have traumatic problems.
All right.
So is that
Let's try
recurring?
to fund that if we can. Okay, so let's say okay for right now. I told the superintendent, we need to go through all of these okay, and then have the board come back to us, and then we say, oh my gosh, and then cut again.
So, yeah, I see this, it'll expand and then we'll have to shrink it. Is this recurring then? Does it have to happen every year, or is it one time?
Members of the board, Ms. Noble, it's one time per school. So if we want to keep getting that up to all schools, it's going to take us, that $20,000 per school.
Sure. Okay, but this can go in that's a comfortable non-recurring. And just to say,
Whoa. I'm hearing recurring.
This 100,000 gets it into 5 schools, and we don't have to spend that money on those 5 schools again. We need to spend it on the next 5.
But how do we not have to spend that money again? Because you're going to have people that have left that school now, unless, of course, but it doesn't.
Train the trainer.
Well, and then the trainer leaves. I don't know. I'm concerned that we're all of a sudden counting on a great deal of mentorship and building capacity was the phrase you used. And sometimes, unless that continues to happen and, the principal at the site knows that that's a priority, then this gets watered down over the years, and then it's...
Well, I think we have to think about that, and it was clear that it costs $20,000 to get it into a school. That is not an annual number to run the program. It's to get it in. And you're right, there may be some attrition and what have you, but I see this as, frankly, very different from the Cypress model, which we would need to have that amount of money available to run if it's successful.
Yeah.
This is truly non-recurring money. That we could call a pilot project with non-recurring money with the understanding that it might go away, blah, 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 but really that's different to me. This is truly non-recurring money.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
And just anecdotally, I talked to a teacher recently who framed PAX very helpfully to me, which was, if you spend less time dealing with behavioral issues, which this person said this program really does, then you get instructional hours
Yeah.
back. And the currency for teachers around that, to me, is very, very important.
Okay. Great. School resource officers, obviously, we haven't, that's going to be a hot button issue too when it's on the agenda. We haven't decided on it in any way. Yeah. We
I
should
mean, you
keep it
can-
just in case.
You can keep, but I will tell you, I'm not going to support school resource officers because I think we're sending a wrong message to
All
the
right.
community with that.
Let's have that conversation, because that'll be on the agenda really soon.
Okay.
A yea or nay on that one, but let's just keep it there in case. Emergency management position.
What, Mr. Board President, what is that? I know what it is, but is that $25,000 to hire somebody? Who's going to work for it? Nobody's going to work for $12 an hour.
I don't remember Mr. Romero, do you remember?
Or did we just bring it up and you're having to deal with it?
It needs to be on
You
the
have
mic.
to,
I'm sorry, I already forgot protocols. Board President, board members, the answer to the question, the current emergency management position that is vacant right now was
That's
a
right.
.6 position at $35,000 a year. We want to make it a full-time position. There's plenty of work that we're trying to keep up with, and we want to make it a full-time position. I don't know if it'd take the full additional 25, but it would bring it up a little more.
And I do believe under the conditions that we're in, you had identified that really
Yeah.
is a need.
Yes.
okay. So that's what it is. It's taking a .6 to a 1 FTE.
That's
Correct.
correct.
Got it, okay. Gang?
Sometimes when we read these and we talk about them and I look at them and I'm like,
What the heck is that?
and now
No,
I
understand.
remember what it is.
So we're all there on that one, right? Okay. Promoting academic performance, isn't that what we do all the time anyway?
Some
Why
of
do you need
this,
more
some
money?
of this gets lost in translation when it's reworded. So Carl, and I don't have the notes. We wrote all this down in cabinet, and then when it got typed up, it became this. So, and that's what, like
That's fine.
like we remembered what something else was, but at
Okay.
this point,
It's totally cool. So next, athletic support district-wide, is that increasing like the plans for all the alignment and everything else? Or
No, sir. President Carrillo,
is
this
this
is...
giving everybody jock straps, athletic
This is what
supports?
Christie has ascertained is very much needed in the, to have help for the director of athletics and activities. They need a middle school assistant
Yeah, no,
because
that's,
of all the
Well, this was from
hundreds of-
cutting back. What happened is,
well, we
remember
cut
when
back and now we have to restore.
we cut back, and
understand.
thought we could do it,
And
and
now we
we're-
got a guy in Larry who's putting together a plan and we need some help. Got it. So, guys, good?
No, so if we're going athletic support district-wide, then I still have, you've got your 2 high schools that also have athletic
She's actually
people.
cutting that, right?
Okay, I want to hear that.
Yes. So, Board President Carrillo, Vice President Cashman, exactly. We reorganized, Christie and the athletic director. Also, we all met, including myself and the principals, to look at this reorganization. And now, instead of having the assistant principals be athletic directors, that they would not be. That he definitely will take the reins along with this assistant, and then they'll still have the managers at the schools, though.
So you still have Zeke and Luann.
Yes, sir.
Okay, because I mean, okay, great.
So whenever this athletic director position came up, when somebody left, what, 8 months ago, 9 months ago, and now I think Moots has it, but it wasn't,
No, Sarah Baca was in
I
the
thought they
position.
actually put a lot more responsibility on renting out the facilities. You're not just the athletic director, you have to rent out the facilities, you gotta do this, you gotta do this, you gotta do this, you gotta.
So we
Keep track of grades, I mean, all sorts
So
of.
we replaced Sarah Baca with Eladio. He goes by Larry Chavez, and he's doing an excellent job. But last year, when we had to cut back the budget significantly, we cut back the athletic department to a point where we recognized this isn't working. The other piece combined with that is that we really need, again, alignment in a unified program, and actually those assistant principals need to be doing their assistant principal job. And so since we have the managers, Ms. Wagner along with Ms. Sink worked on this together and looked at what was the most cost-effective way to do this, and this seemed to be a high priority.
Credit recovery expansion?
Go ahead.
President Carrillo, members of the board. I think I remembered this one now. I had to think about it for a minute. And I think what we're talking about there is that as you know, we had to revamp it. I worked with Tom Ryan and then a whole team of people to revamp this program so that we were doing it legally. And so what we have to do is we have to have not only the teachers that are running it, if you will, running the program, but we have to have also paid teachers that have the licenses in the areas for those kids. So there might be a teacher that has 30 kids, we would pay them so much. A science teacher that has so many, they have to be the licensed one that does the work with them, and face-to-face beyond just the credit recovery program. That's the legal way of doing it. So
that's the additional expense relative to that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So is this paying teachers, just the 150K, is that paying, because I know when my kids didn't take credit recovery, but they took those online courses, the instructor there in that class was not math certified, and they just said, well, you know, we'll find you somebody if your dad can't
That's why
help
we
you.
revamped it, because we needed to make it more,
Legit.
yeah, it's a good word.
Okay. Rudy?
Are we done with the list?
Yeah. So we've identified on this one then those things that we support, and then between recurring and non-recurring. Is that correct?
It would be recurring.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
So is it possible for the superintendent and her executive staff to come up with what their recommendations would be on this list of stuff?
Well, these were theirs.
Well, no, not all of them aren't theirs. Some of them are stuff that came out of left field.
No, this list that they gave us that said strategic plan goals was, I mean, all stuff we all worked out, but then they put a price tag to it.
Okay.
I guess when you go back and mesh the numbers again, and we know we haven't cut enough, we've just added, and then that's the time for, I would suggest that the superintendent say, okay, board, it's ambitious, I know you want all of these things, but here are what we can afford, and here's a sequence that I think you need to have this before you have that. Does that make sense, Superintendent?
Yeah, I would imagine, now do you want me to mesh the two together into one list?
I would say into one
And
list
then
where it's combined
prioritize
with the
them,
strategic plan,
and
yeah.
then prioritize based on recurring and non-recurring?
As long as, for a little bit of humor, as long as you remember, all my priorities are number one.
Well, we
Okay,
all,
thank
yeah,
you.
no, but we all kind of, when you did your list, we all kind of said those are ours. Anyway, curious.
And we just, you know, an informal running total, I think we just added close to $750,000 to recurring expenses.
But then we also took off a whole bunch to non-recurring. I mean, there's a whole
I'm
bunch.
just doing a running what we added.
All right.
And what we added to keep in. You know, we'll see when it's all said and done, but I think it's.
We didn't come up with $1 million in cuts.
No, we didn't.
added.
And the only reason, I mean, it's somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million, and I'm not exactly clear what happened on the first two lines of this page, which is why I'm just picking the middle number, 750.
What? Gosh, yeah. Talk about hate mail. Okay, all right. You're a funny dude. Well, we've done all the discussion, right? I mean, I think this was very productive in going through it all, so you guys had an idea of what was really important, maybe what was not as important. Would you agree? I know it was time-consuming. Okay. I would say thank you very much for indulging the board and going through all this. Maureen, keep it snappy. Next is,
And incidentally,
discussion.
$500,000 to $1 million in non-recurring expenses on this list,
Yeah.
too, that we just went through.
but then we did cut some stuff out of that one page. We cut a whole bunch out. We did good.
Okay.
All right.
So are we ready to board discussion and possible action?
Can we look at the last slide real quick?
Oh.
I just have one
Any
question there.
questions?
The last slide that says, yes, we can. Kate?
That one. It's
Oh,
not the
okay.
last slide. This one.
That one? Yeah.
In aggregate, we have 22 current positions over last year, 20 of them in teachers. Where are those, and is that an HR success, getting long-term subs out of the classroom? We've gone from 725 to 745.
President Carrillo, Member Noble, our best, without doing a really super deep dive into this, is that we were adding coaches and interventionists as best we could, because a lot of those are out of Title I, the additional ones. And then we added some pre-K teachers, and that it adds up fairly quickly on the difference between teachers. We still have long-term subs, but we had that last year too. And some of that reflects in 16, 17. Some teachers leaving. I mean, there's a combination of all kinds of things, and it would take us a while to figure out in detail to do our detailed reconciliation. But that's when we actually have a listing by fund, and that's what that indicates, is that we increase the amount of teachers out of Title I and out of pre-K.
Ready?
Just really quick, is since the insurance rates went up statewide because of some big, huge lawsuits that happened throughout the state, can the public schools actually have our own insurer for our public schools, or do we have to go through PED or NEA?
So the only school district that is self-insured is the Albuquerque Public Schools, and they have enough money to be able to do that. The districts and the charters can't afford to be self-insured.
I was just wondering, because if we're suffering, if our district is actually really safe and does an excellent job, and we're having to increase our premiums because some other district messed up, and now our premiums are going up, or their premiums.
Well, it's because we're just part of a
Just
state
food for
pool. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so if it please, I'm sorry, Ms. Kate?
And I don't have in my head our schedule, our exhaustive, tight schedule of where we're going, but I am still hoping, especially as we get to, if we're going to have to consider cuts, what do we pay for in terms of, and I can see and Superintendent, you said earlier, 85% of the budget is in staff, and we have a breakdown of the staff here, and however the categories break down in terms of, what do those numbers translate to budgetarily? What are some of our operational expenses? I'm hoping we get some look at what that $100 million, más o menos, pays for. Thank you.
Okay, yeah? Maureen? The timeline for early college, okay.
Okay, so my first two items I thought I needed to bring up. They were discussed at CRC a couple of weeks ago. And so one of the things that CRC asked, and even the board members said, sit on CRC, where were we on the early college opportunity planning? And we were told, we can't plan the facility because we have no academic plan. And so everybody's mouth dropped open, and we were like, well, why don't we have an academic plan? We need to be moving this along. So I think you answered a little bit tonight about it, but I still think it's a concern for CRC, and maybe when we have time, we might want to have a little bit of a short study session on where do we go, because I think there was a lot of discussion here on, even though the students want one thing, we may not be able to afford everything our students want. And
So maybe attach it to a study session in May?
yeah, or something, because, I just bring up we know how much we have set aside for planning, facility planning in the CRC, and it bothered me that all of a sudden people's eyes lit up and said, well, that money might be available for other things. And so we need to we either have a plan and we know the direction, or we don't, and then we have more money to spend on other projects. So that's all that I wanted to bring up to get the sense of the board. I think we need to have a small study session or part of a study session to talk about where we are going with early college opportunity.
I would agree. Let's think of some time perhaps in May to do that. Rudy?
Mr. President, really quick, doesn't ECO have a board?
Have a what?
They don't have a planning group, a planning board that Kim Shanahan and a few others?
Well, they have people that have been involved that you all have been working with that are still, yeah. I wouldn't call it a board, but people that they work with, yeah. Okay, so we'll do a study session on that sometime in May. And then the possible renaming.
Right. That also came up in CRC. We're going to be doing a major renovation over at Aspen.
You all saw the plan because we voted on it, right?
It came to the board, but part of that will be new signage. And as we talked, and especially President Carrillo and I talked about, at one time Aspen was supposed to be a science, STEM, magnet. Now, I looked at Board Policy 504. A magnet school requires, first of all, that you have a specific type of academic program, and you're also lottery. Well, that does not, right now, Aspen does not have a heavy science influence, and neither is it a lottery school. So I brought it up for board discussion because either we remove the word magnet out of that title, or if we're going to keep magnet in, then we either have to change our policy, or because we don't, it's not a lottery, so.
So essentially, we have to decide as a board, do we want to eliminate the word magnet, right? Yeah, I think so. Kate, I want to eliminate the word magnet. It was never a magnet, shouldn't be magnet. Yeah, Kate.
I am okay renaming without the word magnet. I don't know if anybody has spoken to the principal or I did actually reach out to some parents, grandparents that are active in the school. They don't seem to have a problem with it.
Principal was fine with it too. He was at CRC.
Okay. And, you know, I think it's fine, and it's not a magnet, and if they wanted to become a magnet, in my view, they could even become a magnet under the policies that Vice President Cashman outlined without having the word magnet.
And most magnet schools don't have the word magnet in their school.
So, and I know that they are working on emphasizing the science curriculum and that
It's not a community school either.
It's also just a really awkward name to have magnet in there, so it's fine to take it out.
Okay.
The other policy says.
Hold on, so it's
all of our-
possible action. So you
Right,
guys want to do
so-
this now?
Yeah, because I was going to say, but a community school, our other policy says all of our schools are community schools.
Híjole, but that's
So I'm
not
just
the
saying, but so
definition of the business.
But anyways.
Okay, so may I entertain a motion to eliminate the word magnet?
I will move to eliminate the word magnet.
Second.
And I will second it.
All in favor?
Just for discussion really quick, what happened to all the promises, working collaboration, we're working with landlord to get all these, to help us out with some grant money?
All that's still
funding money?
happening.
Okay.
We get a lot of money from
So then
them.
they're-
They're incredible partners.
So
But that doesn't mean we're going to have a STEM magnet school.
And they're on the agenda next time.
Yeah,
Maybe they'll fund our 4th and 5th grade science initiative for
there you go.
$50,000.
Because, yeah. So all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Will you guys communicate with Christy and the team that, on the word magnet? Okay, next is policy
and then-
504, acceptance
and-
of grants.
And that came up based on the action we took on the board last week on the eliminating NRA funding. I think we need to, I don't know what the policy should be, but.
You didn't bring a copy of 504 for us?
Oh, yeah. There should, yes, there is a copy of.
Oh, it's in there?
In
this,
the
got it.
board book, yes. There is a copy of 504 in the board book, and I will tell you where it is in one second.
It's an 8C.
It's, and the magnet policy was there.
Was there too.
You guys are so on it. I know.
Okay, so I did bring a copy of the policy. I think that probably, I don't know what the policy should say, and maybe our legal team, our legal staff can take a look, but, as I said, I thought we were maybe heading down a slippery slope when we say, well, today I like your organization, tomorrow I don't like yours, or, you know, so
Okay.
I
So
don't,
what's interesting about what you bring up is, was this grant proposal, did people just do this like the boosters on their own? Because you wonder, it's like, where did, you know, because obviously, it sounds like this never really came before the district business office. Carl, did this ever come before you guys, the NRA grant? The NRA grant money, did you ever get to review that? Yeah, so what I think we need to do is ask the superintendent to make sure that people are in compliance with 504. So if some other organization comes forward at another point that may be objectionable, maybe they're not, whatever, if they deem it necessary, they bring it to the board. Does that sound good?
yeah, as long as we're
Okay.
following policy.
Great.
So Kate has a,
Cool. So the reason I put on, yes, I'm sorry, Kate.
The way I read this, this is about money, not supplies. Maybe the language is broad enough to include supplies, but anyway, and I would imagine that the NRA grant wasn't the only supply grant that we get.
I would think, because it says grant sources for the improvement of school program and services, so I think it could be an in-kind grant. I think would be covered by it. The only thing, I mean, at the time, I I'd never thought to bring it to you. I don't think I even saw it, quite frankly, Carl. You know, how that grant, how those grants come in. So some go directly to the school, the schools apply for them, but then you receive it, right? And then they get rolled up into the consent agenda, right? And they'll be on that sheet when the board accepts the money on a budget adjustment request, right? So I would say that you're seeing them on the bars every time we accept money, even if they're tiny amounts. So I think all of us can kind of keep our eyes open for it. I mean, the NRA thing never really even stood out. I didn't even really realize that we had NRA dollars.
If it's not money, would it hit?
But it would still have been there because it's a grant, right?
Right. Superintendent Garcia, President Carrillo, and Member Noble, if it's money, we see it, because it comes through our office and we deposit in the appropriate account as it's designated.
Oh, yeah,
If
because it's
in-kind
equipment.
services, we wouldn't see that, and we're not from, I don't think we have, I'm not aware that we have any other ones.
So we don't have well, I don't know. But we don't have a mechanism really for knowing what the schools are getting in in-kind donations per se, because it doesn't require a budget adjustment request.
So given that, I would say, and this would probably, and then Rudy, would probably meet your requirements, is that going forward, we'd like to know if people are receiving in-kind services. I mean, what if, you know, there's some white supremacist organization in Idaho that is like underhandedly giving money to schools? You never know. So it would be nice to know what's going into our schools and who's giving it.
So I think that we probably need to work on a policy, you know, that the board, that requires the schools to, you know, I mean, I can certainly send a memo out, but if you want to make sure it's lasting, that there is a policy that they at least inform us before, when they're applying. I mean, because we've had, I just got to tell you the cleanup work that we've had to do. We have some schools that think they can enter into MOUs. And we have found out that we've got schools entering into MOUs with private entities. I know that Lisa is working on that to tighten that up. So we can send that out and just say, you know, until further notice, please inform us of all your applications for approval, even for in-kind support.
Okay.
I would just caution the board just to be very careful. You have PTAs raising money, you have dance clubs doing car washes, you have a...
That's not us.
You have a
That's
vending
the
machine.
case.
You have a vending machine inside of a government building. Then also, if we could look at this legal reference here, because it is a statute. New Mexico statute's annotated here, 1978-23-5. So obviously, somebody came up with this grant award policy off of this statute here. So I don't know, Lisa, if we could look into that.
This is about how we account for the money.
Yeah.
We have to follow the governmental accounting procedures for how we account for the dollars. But in kind, I don't know, we don't have anything.
So just going forward, I mean, you can just send a quick thing out, please, until we develop or until we craft the new policy, please just let us know when you're receiving in-kind services from folks. Is that okay, Maureen?
yeah, I
Okay.
just wanted
That's
to
all.
make sure we're
Good.
very consistent.
Okay. Okay,
I guess I'm not sure we need a new policy.
well, we just need to look at it and maybe.
Well, and that's what I'm
remind
getting
people that
at
it
is,
exists.
I kind of agree with Rudy here that it's, and I don't want to create a bunch of work, but Dr. Garcia, if you or whomever is appropriate on your staff think about it, I don't feel we need to be prescriptive about what happens with in-kind reporting, but, if it's something that, and it sounds like it might be something that you feel needs a little bit of thought and cleanup.
I guess what I would like to say is, we do have policies on PTAs and booster clubs. That's a different policy. It's very, but this wasn't really, we were told it was a grant, and we just said no to that grant. And so we don't, I just think we need to be very clear on whether we're just taking, we don't want to
take money willy-nilly from anybody.
No, I understand that. I want to be clear on what we're asking
No,
the
so can we
superintendent
ask,
to do.
without having to do an action item, can we just say, Dr. Garcia, can you look at this and see what we need to do, and in the meantime,
Or
maybe
if we
send a
don't
memo
need to
out
do
to people
anything.
saying, just until we come up with something or not, please just let us know if you're receiving in-kind services or money from people, in-kind services. Is that all right?
I mean, I don't want, I think that's a running a district decision. And so, I'm comfortable with asking Dr. Garcia if we need to do anything more. I don't know if we just, it
That's what we just
sounded
said.
like we were asking for a new policy to be developed, board policy on in-kind services.
We're just asking you to take a look at it.
Okay.
Is that cool?
That's
Okay. I would like us to take a look at what it would take to develop a JROTC at Capitol High School for fall of 2019.
I have an answer for you.
Yes, ma'am.
There's no room at the inn.
Híjole, what is that supposed to mean?
We've talked to Ms. Runyon, Ms. Wagner. Facility-wise, there is no room for that program. We would have to apply, first of all, to one of the branches of the military. Apparently, that's tight.
easy.
And in
They told me
terms of
about,
it, yeah. But they also have to have the funding on their side, and they
Yeah.
only have so many programs in the country. But foremost, we do not have the space at that facility.
Well, darn it.
So are you satisfied with that? Because if not, I have some concerns.
Let's build it. If we build it, they will come.
Well,
I know.
Right now, do we have Capitol High School students on the JORTC?
Yeah, there's some at Santa Fe
That's
High.
right. So I'm concerned before we expand to another ROTC program or a junior ROTC program, that we can adequately fund the program that we have. And I think it definitely, when you start, I know it's very exciting because they're an award-winning program, but when you start breaking that and having more resources, then do you dilute the impact of that program. So I wouldn't be in favor of expanding or going to one of the other military services until we really understood the full impact.
Well, that's hence the idea, study it and see if it's possible to do. But I know there's interest on the kids for it, and it doesn't matter. Honestly, it's great that our Santa Fe JROTC is as just exemplary as they are, but I would imagine in ROTCs all over the country, maybe that are not even entering statewide competitions, they're learning the same leadership skills, all of these things. And that's the piece that I think is super duper important. And also they're coming away with big fat scholarships. It'd be great to be able, if we can't do it, we can't do it. But it'd be great to be able to afford that to our Jaguar family as well.
But we are affording it to our Jaguar family.
I understand.
So I'm just saying
Okay.
is,
That's all cool.
let's not
That's why I was
spread
there.
ourselves too thin.
Okay. So before we go to what else you have, I just wanted to make sure that in exec session for next Tuesday, obviously, I think we need to have a part on legal, and I can go, but there needs to be a section for like legal lawsuit, stuff like that. Given today's paper or yesterday's, I can't remember, I think there needs to be a section on the sale, not the sale, but the recapture of Turquoise Trail, or just discussing that lease and strategy. Pending litigation, property, as it relates to Turquoise Trail. Negotiations is going to be a standing item until it's over. And, and then superintendent's contract. Because some issues, another board member asked me something, and so we should put it there.
So we're doing 4?
You're going to get that Mercedes after all. No, I'm just kidding with you.
So we're doing 4? Is that 4 items?
That's 4 items. But they won't take the whole hour. It'll be good. Maureen?
No, I'm good.
Rudy? Did you read the paper today? And I can't believe that he didn't know all that was in the pike while he's sitting up there talking to us. Kate? Okay. Well, that was all public. It's in the paper. Yeah. Part of coming to us is telling the truth. Let's add that to the thing that we read, the rules around public forum. Tell the truth. Yeah, how hard is it? All right. So unless there's anything else, we're all good? So I believe that we do need to actually have a vote to adjourn, so a motion to adjourn? Second. All in favor? Any opposed? Let the record show that it's a one person spoke, all of us agreed.